One day my husband told me something unbelievable. "Mom is moving in with us at the beginning of next month," he announced. At that time he only talked to me when it was necessary, and we hardly had any real conversations. "That's pretty sudden, isn't it? Are you okay with this?" I asked. "It's not that. I just wonder if your mom knows," I replied. "Don't worry, there's no way she would refuse," he said, acting like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had been putting up with his condescending attitude and creepy smile for a long time. Now was the time to get back at him. I had been playing the obedient wife just for this moment. "You know what to do, right?" he asked. "Yes, I know," I replied. 10 seconds after he finished talking, I called the lawyer I had arranged. "Sorry, but please proceed." Then I called the moving company. I had been waiting for this moment. "Yes, please come right away. Take all the furniture, appliances, everything in the house." "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked, clearly upset. "I'm leaving, just like you wanted," satisfied. "Why are you taking everything?" he stammered. What a pathetic man, but he still didn't know that the real pain was just about to start. "My name is Helena. I turned 30 this year. I work at City Hall. I wanted my parents to see their grandchild as soon as possible, so when I was 28, I met my husband, Martin. A mutual friend introduced us, and we ended up having a meal together. According to our friend, we both wanted to get married early, so they arranged the meeting thoughtfully. I'm a bit shy by nature. By the way, Helena, do you work as a public servant?" he asked. "Oh yes," I replied. "Any favorite foods?" he asked. "Well, I'm good with anything," I said. Our conversations didn't last long, just like this one. I felt like I should have just declined and gone home quickly. At that time I thought Martin was probably bored too. But everything changed when Martin said one thing. "Hey, isn't that keychain on your bag a limited edition one?" "Huh? You know about this?" I asked, surprised. "Of course I have the same one," he said, showing me his keychain. Sure enough, the same keychain was attached to it. I was pleasantly surprised to meet someone who shared the same hobby. After that, the atmosphere completely changed, and we had a great time. We obviously made plans to meet again. "Will you go out with me with marriage in mind?" Martin said that on our third date. I didn't expect him to say it, but I still remember the joy I felt. It felt like I was dancing. "If you're okay with me," I said, and that's how our relationship began. By the way, public servants don't face layoffs, right? Yes, they're generally considered stable as long as you don't do anything weird. You can work until retirement, right? "Is there a problem?" he asked. "No, it's just something I've been curious about," he replied. After that, Martin frequently asked questions about public servants. At that time, he was just a regular office worker, probably seeking stability. 3 months later, he proposed, and I accepted. However, I gave him one condition: not to live together with anyone else. That's how our married life began. But after marriage, Martin showed his true face, and it was awful. "Since we're going to live together now, I'll help with the housework as much as I can." "Really? That would be a great help," I said, relieved. "Leave it to me," he said. At first, splitting the housework, including cleaning and laundry, went well. I appreciated his cooperation and enjoyed doing chores together, but at some point he stopped helping with the housework and started lunging around the house. I couldn't predict such a change would come. "Can you help with the cleaning?" "Cleaning? Sorry, I'm a bit busy. Can't it wait?" "How long will it take?" I asked. "I can't say for sure," he replied. He said he was busy, but he was just messing around on his phone and computer, not looking busy at all. The most he would do was sort the garbage. Even just taking it out would have been fine, but I always ended up handling the important things myself. Then one morning he said, "I'll be late today, so I don't need dinner." "How late? Around what time?" I asked. When I asked that, I thought I heard him click his tongue. How would I know? If I said I'll be late, then I'll be late, Martin replied, clearly irritated. I couldn't understand why he was so angry when I just asked a simple question. Then I did something that rubbed him the wrong way. "How can you not know?" "Shut up. I told you I don't know," he snapped. "Sorry, you really ruined my mood this morning. Just stop it," he said as he left for work. After that, I felt remorseful. I went to work with a heavy heart. "What's the matter today? You don't seem well," my boss, Mona, who is 3 years older than me, asked. "I'm sorry, I messed up a bit this morning," I replied. "From the looks of it, did something happen with your husband?" "Huh? Can you tell?" After nearly 10 years of marriage, I felt I could trust her with my concerns, so I told her about the morning's events. "Maybe you asked him one too many times." I thought so, but that might not be the only issue. "What do you mean?" I asked, concerned. "My husband was in a similar situation before," Mona said, making me feel uneasy. I had a bad feeling from what Mona was saying. I could sense something was wrong. What happened in the end? I asked cautiously, were there any other strange changes? I thought about it, and the only other issue I could think of was that Martin wasn't helping with the housework. When I told Mona about that, she crossed her arms and seemed to ponder something. This is just my opinion, but could it be that something happened at work? In my case, when I confronted my husband, I found out he had been laid off. What did you do then? I asked. I wasn't angry, but I felt sad that he didn't tell me about it. Men tend to have too much pride, don't they? That's true. So they're too embarrassed to talk about it themselves. I felt a pang of anxiety in my chest. What if Mona was right? With my personality, I didn't think I could directly ask Martin. That day, I couldn't focus on work and went home feeling restless and uneasy. What should I do? Then an idea came to mind. I immediately picked up the phone. Hello, I wanted to ask you something about Martin. Sure, but what is it? I was just wondering how Martin's job has been lately. You mean if things are going well? Yeah, I was hoping you'd heard something. I ran into him the other day, and he didn't seem to have any problems. Got it, thanks. Sorry for calling out of the blue. The worries I had vanished. If Martin's longtime friend vouched for him, I could believe it. If there were no problems, that was enough. Time passed, but it became more noticeable that Martin was coming home late. Are you coming home late again tonight? Yeah, I've been a bit busy lately. Okay, don't overdo it. Yeah, I know. Then one day I saw something unexpected. Around noon on my way to the convenience store, a car drove past. It was only for a moment, but I immediately recognized the driver as Martin. But something was wrong. What's the matter? My friend asked. No, it's just, I feel like I just saw Martin drive past in a car. Wait, doesn't your husband commute by train? Yes, and it should take about an hour to get to his workplace by train. My previous anxiety resurfaced. Unable to stay still, I decided to follow him. I caught up quickly as the car stopped at a traffic light. The car pulled into a parking lot. Is that an internet cafe? Why would he be here? Mona's words echoed in my head. Could your husband be out of a job? I quickly took out my phone and snapped a picture of him entering the cafe. You startled me when you suddenly took off running, my friend said. I'm sorry, I just wanted to confirm it properly. So, what did you find? As I mentioned before, my husband might have quit his job. Well, the next step is up to you, but I'm always here to listen. Come on, lunch break is almost over. Let's head back. That night, I made up my mind and asked Martin, did you really go to work today? Huh. Of course I did. Then what's this? I showed him the picture. His face immediately changed color. So I guess I've been caught. As you suspected, Helena, I quit my job. Even though I sensed it, hearing it directly from him was so shocking that my mind went blank. But he had lied to me, and this was just the beginning. Why did you do that? I asked, overwhelmed by feelings I couldn't explain. I've always wanted to be a writer. A writer? I didn't know how to respond to that confession. I was speechless at his unexpected answer. Then Martin raised his voice and said, I always thought it was impossible, but in the end, I wanted to pursue my dream. Without consulting me at all, I couldn't understand what he was thinking. The thought that he had been living with me while thinking about this all along made me lose trust in him. More questions arose in my mind. Is this something you've wanted since before we got married? Yeah, even back then I was thinking about quitting my job someday to spend more time on what I love. Doesn't that count as betraying me? Huh? Why would you say that? Isn't it obvious? After proposing, you asked me so many questions about my job as a public servant, but you actually intended to quit your job to chase your dream all along, didn't you? Martin began laughing as if he had been liberated and started answering, yeah, that's right. But your salary was lower than I expected, which I didn't plan for. What? But don't worry, I'll figure something out soon, and our income will increase. Deep down, I thought there was no way this plan would succeed, but I couldn't bring myself to say it, so I swallowed my words. From the next day, Martin became less considerate of me and began acting differently than before. His behavior and words made me feel that something was changing in our relationship. He started looking down on me and giving orders. I'm going to focus on writing from now on, so don't interrupt me. Soon, you'll be the wife of a best-selling author. Understood? I thought it was impossible, so I contacted my friend again. I started to suspect that my friend might have lied to me too, but I quickly realized that wasn't the case. Just as I was about to contact her, she called me. Great timing. Can I go first? Martin quit his job, but did you really not know about it? I asked. Hold on, she said. Did he say he quit on his own? Yes, he did, I replied. My friend's reaction wasn't what I expected. Her expression seemed to say, that's not right. I heard this from someone, but it seems like Martin didn't quit. He was laid off. Wait, laid off? You mean he was fired? Yes, and the reason was because he embezzled company funds. You've got to be kidding. But But that's a crime. I never thought he'd go this far. It seems he finally crossed a line he shouldn't have. I heard he avoided prosecution by paying everything back, she continued. Even if that's true, what's wrong is wrong. And there's more. As soon as I heard my friend's words, my head started to hurt. How awful a man could he be? The story so far was already bad enough, but there was still more. I took a deep breath. So, what else has he done? I asked. When I heard what she said, I felt pity before surprise, but now Martin had no escape. I had crucial evidence in my hands. Thank you for the information. So what are you going to do now? She asked. Do you want to hear? Nah, I can kind of imagine, so I'll pass. And so the desire for revenge against him grew stronger within me. I thought that just laying out the facts wouldn't be satisfying enough, so I decided to give him despair so crushing that he couldn't recover. For a while, I played the role of the obedient wife, planning to drag him down from his current height to the depths of despair. How's the writing going? I asked him. It's going well. Maybe I should let you read it. I'd love to read it, I replied. When I read his novel, I was stunned, not because I thought it was amazing. On the contrary, it was so terrible that I was speechless. I think it's a pretty good piece. I really like it. I lied to make him happy. He cheerfully returned to his room. Around that time, I started noticing my mother-in-law's behavior. I didn't have much interaction with her because I didn't like her, but after finding out about Martin's situation, she began contacting me more frequently. Most of her messages were complaints, and when I'd say it must have been really tough, she'd reply, exactly. Her complaints mainly revolved around my late father-in-law, who passed away before I started dating Martin. Apparently he was quite the authoritarian husband, and she seemed to have been haunted by that past for a long time. Whenever I gently brought up Martin, she'd say, "It's only natural for a wife to support her husband, isn't it?" "Didn't I just tell you that?" I'd reply. She'd then continue, "When my husband was alive." But no matter if the topic changed, she'd eventually circle back to talking about my father-in-law. I was halfway to giving up on her. She didn't seem to feel any guilt about Martin either. For a while my mother-in-law continued to contact me, but one day her calls suddenly stopped. Talking to her was exhausting, so I was secretly relieved when she stopped reaching out. Then one day my husband said something unbelievable. "Mom is moving in with us at the beginning of next month," he announced. At that time he only spoke to me when necessary, and we hardly had any conversation. "That's quite sudden, isn't it? Do you have anything against that?" I asked. "It's not that, but I just wonder if your mom knows." "Don't worry, there's no way she would refuse," he replied, as if it were as natural as breathing. It seemed like he hadn't told her yet, but knowing my mother-in-law, she probably wouldn't refuse. "But what about the preparations?" I asked. "I'll take care of that." "Do I need to do anything?" "You have a more important role to play," he said. I immediately understood what he meant. I'd been enduring his condescending attitude and creepy smile for a long time. Now was the time to get back at him. I'd been playing the obedient wife just for this. "You know what to do, right?" he asked. "Yes, I know," I replied. 10 seconds after he finished talking, I called the lawyer I had arranged. "Sorry, but please proceed." Then I called the moving company. I'd been waiting for this moment, ignoring Martin's shout of, "Who are you calling?" I continued my conversation. "Yes, please come right away. Take all the furniture, appliances, everything in the house." "What are you talking about?" Martin asked, clearly upset. "I'm leaving, just like you wanted," satisfied. "Why are you taking everything?" "They're available right now, so they'll be here soon," I replied. 15 minutes later, the movers arrived. I immediately gave them instructions. "Stop them right now," Martin yelled. "Wasn't I the one who bought most of the things in this house, or did you forget? But even so, you insisted on buying new stuff even though we didn't have the money." "Oh, I see, that's why you used your company's money, isn't it?" He stood there stunned and wide-eyed, probably shocked that I knew about it. What a fool. How could you do something so disgusting? "You're the lowest of the low," I confronted him. "Who told you that?" he stammered. "That's not the issue. Everything has come to light. Did you say you wanted to be a writer just to cover up the fact that you were fired?" "No, that's not it. Writing really was my dream," he insisted. As we argued, all the furniture and appliances disappeared from the room. Seeing the empty room, Martin looked devastated, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing?" he asked. That's when I decided to push him even further. I called my mother-in-law. "Who are you calling now? Just stop this, all right?" "No, we're just getting started. Your mom is coming." "What if she arrives now? What am I going to do?" "Figure it out yourself." "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. Martin still seemed to be hiding something. "Is there something else you're not telling me?" I asked. "I don't have any money right now, and Mom is drowning in gambling debt. Please, you have to help me. At that moment, he started to cry. Seeing a grown man crying right in front of me was just pathetic. That's not my problem. She's your mother, so deal with it yourself. Asking for help like this is disgraceful. The sudden drop in contact from my mother-in-law was undoubtedly because she was too engrossed in gambling. They're both hopeless, mother and son. 30 minutes later, my mother-in-law arrived with a bang. Welcome, please come in. I led her to the living room, where nothing was left. There, sitting on the floor and still crying, was Martin. Seeing this, my mother-in-law was left speechless, frozen with her mouth wide open. What on earth happened, and why is the room empty? She demanded. I'll explain everything now. I turned to my mother-in-law and began telling her the truth. Wait, hold on. This isn't a lie, right? No, it's not a lie. It's all true. If you don't believe me, ask Martin yourself. Martin, explain yourself properly, she ordered. Martin was visibly terrified of his mother's words. The scene that followed was unbearable to watch. Martin couldn't even give his mother a straight answer. I understand everything now. This woman is the root of the problem. Unexpectedly, my mother-in-law made me her target. I couldn't hide my surprise at her reaction. You should be the one solving this problem, she said. But I didn't need to endure anymore. Neither Martin nor my mother-in-law mattered to me anymore. I'm the victim here. Why am I being blamed? I protested. Whether you're a victim or not isn't the issue, she replied. I sighed and went to my room to fetch something. There's no point in talking. Look at this. I threw a document down in front of Martin. Is this a divorce paper? You can see it for yourself. You wanted me out of this house, right? Martin tried to mount one last defense, but little did he know how futile it would be. You're going to regret divorcing me. Don't think a woman like you will find someone else to marry. You really don't understand anything, do you? What are you talking about? He asked, confused. I then showed him several photos of him leaving a hotel with a young woman I didn't recognize. Martin turned pale as he looked at the photos. You understand now, right, mother? This man embezzled from his company and cheated on me. He's just a useless man. Please stop this. I'll apologize. I'm not looking for an apology. Where did all that bravado go? Watching my mother-in-law corner Martin, I realized how much trouble he was in. Did you really go this far? What were you thinking? She asked. It was just a moment of weakness. No excuses. I don't remember raising you like that, she scolded. Predicting their conversation would drag on, I threw a decisive remark at Martin. Well, don't forget the property division. Property division? I don't have anything to pay. I'll leave that matter to the lawyer. You should be hearing from them soon. Wait, he tried to cling to me, but I pushed him away. As he crumpled to the floor, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Goodbye. The rest is up to you two. Please don't leave me, Martin pleaded. When Martin tried to chase after me, his mother stopped him. First, you need to explain yourself properly. I'll explain in detail later. This isn't the time for that. If things continue like this, it's really over. You can't even listen to your mother. I left them both and walked out of the house. As much as I wanted to see more, I couldn't bear to stay another second. Hellish days awaited the two of them, but that was no longer my concern. Please, can't we talk one more time and work this out? This was what Martin said when I returned to my parents' house. Do you really mean that? I'm serious. At least Mom has gone home. Oh, I see. But sorry, that's not going to happen. Why not? If you can't understand that much, then you should just give up. Truly pathetic. No matter what happens, Martin is no longer my concern. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized through the lawyer, and he was ordered to pay property division. Moreover, it seems he took out loans to repay the embezzled money, so it looks like his struggles are far from over. In the end, Martin couldn't even pay the rent and ended up moving back in with his mother. However, her place was also rented, so they eventually moved to a cheap apartment. Now I hear my mother-in-law works at the local supermarket day and night. They're always fighting, and their arguments have become quite notorious in the neighborhood. I've heard from someone living near their apartment that their quarrels are an everyday occurrence. Apparently, they curse at each other daily, causing a lot of trouble for the other residents with their noise. This is how it all ended up. Yes, too much has happened, and I'm exhausted. Well, it's time to relax now. Yes, I will. From now on, I want to enjoy life just for myself. I'm now living fulfilling days by finding new hobbies, traveling with friends, and focusing on work. I never want to go back to that kind of married life again. When I think about the stress and hardships, I truly appreciate how wonderful my current peaceful and free life is. Once in a lifetime is more than enough for such an experience. From now on, I want to cherish myself and live a happy life.
In a world where I thought love was a language I'd never speak, his words, "Would you consider going out with me?" struck a chord I never knew I had. I stared blankly at Jude, stunned by his bold invitation. Me, the office recluse, being asked out by one of our most personable clients. It seemed unfathomable. I know this seems out of the blue, he continued with a warm smile, but I've wanted to get to know you better for a while now. You intrigue me. I felt my cheeks flush as I scrambled for words. My instinct was to politely decline and retreat to my safe solitary office, but something in his gentle eyes chipped away at my guarded facade. I'd love to, I managed, the words escaping before I could overanalyze their implication. His face lit up with pleasant surprise. Yeah, great. Are you free Friday night? I nodded, suddenly feeling shy as scattered memories of high school dances and my college roommates' many suitors flashed through my mind. My scant romantic history felt woefully inadequate preparation for an evening alone with Jude. As we exchanged numbers, planning the location and time, apprehension and excitement dueled within me. I had always admired Jude from afar, drawn to his affable confidence and easy charm. But I never imagined his interest would extend to someone like me, the office introvert who preferred headphones and spreadsheets to happy hours with colleagues. That Friday evening, I agonized over my outfit, changing 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and heels. I barely recognized my reflection, a far cry from the jeans and blouses I lived in at the office. As the Uber approached the restaurant, my nerves kicked into overdrive. You can do this, I told myself. Just make conversation. I was greeted by the scent of grilled meat and raucous laughter as I walked through the doors. The buzz of a Friday night crowd set my anxiety on edge. But then I spotted Jude waving at a small table nestled in a quiet corner. His smile eased my tension. You look beautiful, he said, pulling out my chair. I lowered myself down, smoothing my dress self-consciously. This place is really nice. Do you come here a lot? I asked. As we fell into casual banter about local restaurants, my nervousness gradually gave way. Jude's presence was disarming, engaged but relaxed, funny but thoughtful. Our conversation drifted seamlessly from work to hobbies to childhood memories over steak frites and wine. I barely touched my food, too caught up in his entertaining stories to think about eating. Jude jumped from topic to topic with enthusiastic ease, while I mainly listened, interjecting occasional questions or reactions. Despite my tendency to avoid eye contact, I found myself stealing glances at his bright amber eyes as he spoke. After the plates were cleared, Jude glanced at his watch. I didn't mean to keep you so late. I know it's a work night. Oh, that's okay, I said quickly. In truth, I had barely noticed the passing hours in his company. As we walked out to catch our Ubers, Jude gently brushed his hand against mine. The subtle contact sent a spark through my skin. I had a wonderful time, Alara, he said softly. Would you want to go out again next weekend? I nodded, suddenly unable to find my voice. As my Uber pulled up, Jude leaned in, planting a delicate kiss on my cheek. Good night, he whispered before turning to leave. I watched him disappear into the night, my fingers touching the spot his lips had grazed. The chord he struck within me now hummed with new life. I knew in that electric moment that my world would never be the solitary place it once was. Our bliss lasted only a few short years before life threw its first major obstacle at us. Barely 2 years into our marriage, Jude's promising startup collapsed almost overnight, the victim of embezzlement by a duplicitous business partner. I still remember Jude's ashen face when he told me the news over the phone. It's all gone, Alara. Everything. His voice cracked as he explained how his conniving co-founder had drained their accounts before disappearing without a trace. My heart ached for my kind-hearted husband, knowing how much blood and sweat he had poured into his company. I rushed to meet him, enveloping his slumped frame in my arms. I'm so sorry, Jude, I whispered, holding him tightly. We'll get through this. I promise. In the months that followed, we slowly adjusted to our new financial reality. The lease on our trendy apartment was not renewed. Designer brands and upscale restaurants were replaced with thrift stores and home cooking. Jude fell into a period of despair, struggling to pull himself out of bed most mornings, much less send out job applications. Eventually, our dwindling savings forced my hand. One late night, Jude came home to find me sitting solemnly at our kitchen table. We can't avoid it anymore. One of us needs a steady job with benefits, I said gently. Jude stared at the floor silently before sinking into the chair across from me. I know, he finally replied, his voice laced with shame. I'm trying, Alara. These past few months have been difficult. I reached for his hand reassuringly. Let me job hunt for a while. My background may make it easier for me to find something quickly. Though it wounded his pride, Jude eventually conceded. Within a few weeks, I leveraged my financial analysis skills into a mid-level position at a thriving corporation. Meanwhile, Jude half-heartedly submitted applications, his enthusiasm still dampened. Upon receiving my first paycheck, I surprised Jude with dinner at our favorite upscale restaurant, but instead of delighting him, the extravagant evening seemed to underscore his feelings of failure. We can't afford this, Alara, he said sullenly, eyeing the polished surroundings. Not on an administrative assistant's salary. Stung by his thoughtless words, I bit my tongue to restrain a retort. Later, I tried gently broaching his comment, but Jude refused to discuss it further. As I drifted to sleep that night, an uneasy feeling stirred within me. The dynamics of our relationship were shifting, but to what end I did not yet know. Over the next year, Jude cycled through short-lived contract jobs while my career advanced rapidly. Each of my promotions and pay raises seemed to drive the wedge between us in deeper. Pleasant dinners would suddenly flip into moody silences if I mentioned work. Offhand comments about my lucky break stung. But Jude's biggest blow came on the heels of my latest achievement, a senior manager role that nearly doubled my prior income. I arrived home thrilled to share the good news, only to find Jude pacing angrily. I can't keep doing this, he erupted before I could even speak. Watching you succeed so effortlessly while I flounder. Why did I bother with college when you make twice my income without even trying? I stood speechless, stricken by his verbal attack. Jude, that's not fair, I finally responded, fighting back tears. My job requires 80-hour weeks and extensive travel. You know I would happily trade places. Oh, please, he scoffed. You love the fancy office and business trips. Don't pretend this hasn't been the best thing that ever happened to your career. As his cruel words echoed through our silent apartment, an image of the gentle man I married flickered in my mind. The man now standing before me, twisted by envy and pride, felt like a stranger. My heart broke, realizing the Jude I loved may be gone forever. The months following Jude's outburst dragged on, our relationship strained by unspoken hurts. My demanding job kept me traveling frequently, leaving little time to mend the widening rift between us. During a rare extended stay home, I was surprised to find a sharply dressed Jude waiting with 2 glasses of wine when I returned one evening. Congratulations are in order, he declared, handing me a glass. I started a new position today, at Richardson Financial. I stared blankly, struggling to process this sudden news after so many months adrift. Jude continued explaining his role as a junior broker at the prestigious firm while I nodded mutely. This is wonderful news, I finally managed. What prompted you to apply there specifically? Jude refilled our glasses, his mood buoyant. I realized I couldn't sulk forever, and I know Richardson was on your dream companies list from business school. I detected an unspoken message in his pointed remark. By choosing a firm I admired, perhaps Jude hoped to prevent any envy on my part. I brushed the implication aside, focusing on my relief at this positive development. Over celebratory pasta, Jude enthusiastically outlined his plans to quickly climb the corporate ladder. I smiled encouragingly, though uncertainty lurked at the back of my mind. Jude's checkered employment history left me skeptical of his staying power in the notoriously cutthroat environment, but I kept silent, not wanting to dampen his fledgling confidence. Well, I'm off to bed, Jude said, kissing my cheek after dinner. 5 a.m. comes early when you actually have somewhere to be. I awoke the next morning to find Jude already gone. A quickly scrawled note on the counter wished me a nice day. As I surveyed the remnants of last night's feast, I felt a palpable emptiness. I longed for the days when lazy Saturday mornings meant lingering in bed together before tackling chores or enjoying leisurely brunch dates. Over the next few months, Jude and I mostly passed like ships in the night. My global travel increased substantially with a major product launch, leaving me perpetually jet-lagged. Meanwhile, Jude rapidly advanced at Richardson Financial, regularly working 12-plus-hour days. We traded quick voicemails and the occasional takeout dinner, too exhausted for meaningful interaction. But slowly, our financial state improved with Jude's rising income. We moved into a more spacious apartment closer to Richardson's headquarters. Jude leased a shiny BMW to match his new professional persona. My pay bumps had bought us time, but now Jude's earnings afforded us true stability. I noticed small changes, too. Jude's expensive haircuts, new custom-tailored suits, and sudden golf habit with the guys from work. During my fleeting visits home, Jude entertained me with amusing corporate stories, though names and context often blurred together. "Richardson sure keeps you busy, I commented one night after Jude dismissed a call from a colleague. "Yeah, it's nonstop, but that's life in this industry," he replied. As he detailed his latest high-profile case, Jude's face glowed with vigor and pride. The shadow of resentment and defeat I had watched haunt him these past years finally lifted. My husband had returned, though in an unexpected form. With our careers firmly stabilized and finances on the rebound, I optimistically hoped our marriage, too, could now begin healing. Surely this new upward trajectory marked the end of our relationship woes. Or so my naive heart believed at the time. But unbeknownst to either of us, an unpredictable storm brewed just over the horizon, one that would change the course of our lives forever. I quit. Jude's fork halted midair, a bit of egg dangling precipitously. "You what?" I took a deep breath, grasping my mimosa tightly. "I quit my job as of today." Jude slowly lowered his fork to the plate with a gentle clink. "I don't understand. Why would you quit without discussing it with me first?" "I know, I'm sorry," I replied. "It was an impulsive decision, but the timing felt right." I went on to explain my growing disenchantment with the corporate rat race, the endless slog of meetings and metrics, losing sight of any real purpose. And then an email landed offering me a lucrative freelance financial writing position. Before I could overthink it, I resigned. Jude rubbed his temple, processing this bombshell development. I braced myself for criticism over my rash choice. "Well, I support you," he finally said. "I know how miserable all that travel made you. Just promise you won't become some starving artist now," he added with a wink. I laughed, relief washing over me. "I make more per hour now than with a salary. We'll be fine." In my euphoria over dumping my corporate shackles, I failed to notice Jude's smile not quite reaching his eyes. Over the next few months, I settled happily into my new remote freelance role. The flexible schedule afforded me time to pursue photography and pottery classes, long-neglected passions. With Jude frequently working late, I cherished reconnecting with these creative interests. One evening, while crafting a vase, Jude arrived home unusually early, and not alone. I turned to find an immaculately dressed elderly woman clutching his arm. "Alara, meet my mother Mara," Jude announced. "She'll be staying with us a while." I froze, struggling to process this unexpected guest now surveying my clay-splattered apron with thinly veiled disdain. Jude had never once mentioned his mother coming to visit, much less live with us. "Wonderful to meet you," I managed faintly. "How long exactly was a while?" In the uncomfortable days that followed, I learned Mara's husband had recently passed away after a long illness. According to Jude, the loss left her too fragile to care for their suburban home alone. I empathized with her grief, even as her imposing presence invaded our home. Mara scrutinized our apartment with pursed lips. The modern artwork, my orchid garden, Jude's beloved jazz vinyl collection. Everything seemed to offend her traditional sensibilities. Without asking, she rearranged furniture to allow proper flow, and stocked our kitchen with bizarre health concoctions. Worst of all, Mara's constant, unsolicited advice infuriated me. She critiqued my writing career as a flighty pastime, suggested I dress more modestly, and outright condemned the premarital intimacy Jude and I shared, in our own home. I urged Jude to intervene about his mother's behavior multiple times, but he merely shrugged, responding, "It's just her way. She means well." As Mara's presence infiltrated each room like an invasive species, I sensed my sanctuary dissolving. Lying awake at night, I listened anxiously to Jude reassuring his mother through the thin walls after every minor stressor. The man I once considered my closest confidant now reserved that role for the intruder down the hall who eyed me like a troublesome child. And somehow I had allowed this. The passive husband and domineering mother now controlled our home, while I willingly relinquished my power just to keep the peace. The realization churned a growing fury I could no longer contain. The shrill ringing of my cell phone jarred me from sleep. I fumbled groggily for the device, Jude's name flashing urgently on the screen. "Hello, Jude?" "Alara." His voice was strained with a chilling edge I'd never heard before. "The police just left. Get back here now." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my groggy mind racing through possible emergencies. Sirens blaring past my hotel had awoken me just an hour ago. Were we robbed? Surely no mere household mishap warranted Jude's cryptic tone. I hurriedly dressed and raced home, pacing tensely as the Uber crawled through early morning traffic. I arrived to find an eerie quiet, no signs of forced entry or robbery. But the acidic scent of bleach hung cloyingly in the air. I moved cautiously through each room, ledgering the undisturbed valuables with confusion before noticing the bathroom. Harsh fluorescent light spilled into the hall from the ajar door. Inside, I gasped to discover blood smeared across the newly scrubbed tile walls. The metallic stench overwhelmed me. I clutched the doorway in horror. What had happened here? Just then Jude emerged, his shirt and hands still speckled with scarlet stains. Upon seeing me, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "There you are. This is your doing," he hissed, jabbing his finger toward the lurid scene. "I told the police what really happened, even covered up your rage tantrum, but if you ever lay hands on my mother again—" "What? Jude, I just got home. What on earth are you saying?" I cried. His bizarre accusation made no sense. But before I could plead further, Mara appeared behind Jude's shoulder, an exaggerated slump in her usually ramrod posture. "I tried so hard to keep the peace between you two," she whimpered pathetically. As Jude comforted his clearly unharmed mother, their distorted narrative finally registered. They had concocted this elaborate scene to frame me as unstable and violent. My hands curled involuntarily into fists as I marched toward Mara, ready to confront her deceit. Sensing imminent confrontation, Jude swiftly positioned himself between us. "Officer Costas allowed us to handle this discreetly, since Mother isn't pressing charges," he said. "But he assured me they'll be keeping close watch." I opened my mouth to refute Jude's outrageous threat, but stopped short. Their determination to paint me as an aggressor was suddenly clear. Engaging would only legitimize this infuriating fabrication. Without a word, I turned my back on them and retreated outside to calm my spiraling thoughts. Over the next week, Jude and Mara carried on with their fraudulent charade. She wore a wrist brace for her sprain, while neighbors and Jude's colleagues received anonymous warnings about my concerning temper. My existence became an endless gauntlet of thinly veiled antagonism and betrayal. Soon after, while enjoying a rare solitary afternoon, the doorbell's obnoxious chime broke my focus. I opened it reluctantly, worried Jude had forgotten his keys again, only to find an unfamiliar gentleman clutching a thick folder. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anthony Giles, Social Services," he stated. "I'll need to speak with you about the incident on the 16th. Before I could protest, he stepped inside, flicking open his folder dramatically to begin his interrogation. As Mr. Giles bombarded me with patronizing questions, implying my guilt, fury and frustration welled up dangerously. But I knew reacting emotionally would only legitimize his suspicions. So I calmly recounted my factual innocence despite his transparent agenda against me. Fortunately, he left empty-handed but warned further outbursts would involve children's services regarding my ability to safely parent. Shutting the door firmly against his retreating back, hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. The realization crashed over me. To save myself, I had to abandon this house of lies. No matter the cost. I awoke well before sunrise, Jude's whistling snores grating in my ear. Slipping silently from beneath the sheets, I tucked my pre-packed bag by the front door and contemplated my next move. Today was the day. I would finally confront Jude about the cruise brochures and love poems stashed in his gym bag that confirmed my worst fears. For weeks, an unshakable feeling in my gut whispered Jude was having an affair. When traces first surfaced, I rationalized them away, not yet ready to destroy our already fractured bond. But the mounting evidence now demanded action. As I brewed coffee, I had no intention of drinking. My mind raced through potential scripts for the impending confrontation. Jude often left his work phone unattended on the counter, my chance to gather final proof. When I heard the buzz of a new text notification, my pulse quickened. I tapped the phone gently, stomach churning as the lock screen preview exposed everything. Lurid messages from a contact named Lola Peach filled the screen, leaving nothing to doubt. As I scrolled in horror, hot tears spilled down my cheeks at the graphic descriptions of past rendezvous and enthusiastic plans for reconnecting post-cruise. In that moment, something severed deep within me. The tenuous threads still clinging to hope or denial now snapped entirely. I backed away from the damning device, resolve cementing. Today the pretense would end. I busied myself with mundane tidying, awaiting signs of life from the bedroom. Before long, Mara emerged scowling. News of my resignation last week from the volunteer board she convinced me to join had earned persistent cold shoulders. "Morning, Mara," I offered politely. Her responding sneer said everything. As she shambled off to the couch, Jude finally surfaced. I steeled myself for the showdown ahead. "Jude, do you have a minute to chat?" I asked as casually as possible. He glanced at his watch distractedly while gathering work items scattered around the kitchen. "Can it wait, babe?" "Big presentation today," came his dismissive reply. In the past, I would have uttered a timid, "no problem," before sending him off with a forced smile, but not today. "I'm afraid this can't wait," I said firmly, blocking his path. "We need to discuss your upcoming cruise and Lola Peach." I watched the color drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered unconvincingly. "I don't know any Lo." "Save it," I snapped. Months of suppressed rage now roared loose. "I'm done with your lies. I saw the disgusting messages you left open on your phone. How long did you think you could keep screwing this whore behind my back?" His lips pressed into a rigid line. Before he could reply, an anguished wail erupted from the couch. We turned to see Mara stagger toward us, heaving with dramatic sobs. "I can't bear this cruelty," she cried. "Jude, she's set on destroying this family over pure fantasy." Jude rushed to comfort her, while casting me an icy glare that screamed, "How could you upset my mother this way?" In past arguments, Mara weaponizing her emotions could shame me into silence, but her histrionic meltdown only hardened my resolve now. Without another word to either of them, I stepped outside, slamming the front door with an earth-shaking finality. As my Uber sped away, I grasped the full reality of what I was fleeing, a pathological narcissist twisted by jealousy. Her weak-willed puppet son, so easily manipulated. Their toxic delusions threatened to subsume me completely. Well, not anymore. Today my emancipation began. In the weeks following my dramatic exit, I immersed myself in dismantling the intricate web of lies Jude and his mother had woven. Meticulously documenting their misdeeds became my obsession. I dodged Jude's endless calls and texts, ranging from righteous indignation to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Responding emotionally served no strategic purpose. Instead, I quietly retained cutthroat attorneys and private investigators, methodically building irrefutable cases of infidelity and slander. With my evidence nearing courtroom-ready status, I decided the time had come for a final confrontation on my terms. I invited Jude and Mara to meet at a posh restaurant downtown, sending the address anonymously to pique their curiosity. Right on time, I spotted Jude entering with Mara clinging possessively to his elbow. Good, they took the bait. Allowing them a few minutes to settle uncomfortably at the table, I finally made my entrance. "You actually came. Bravo," I announced acidly, relishing their shocked expressions at my abrupt arrival. Without waiting for a response, I opened my briefcase and theatrically flung 2 manila folders onto the tablecloth, their damning labels clearly visible. Folder 1, Infidelity. Folder 2, Emotional Abuse and Slander. Jude visibly paled while Mara's razor-sharp eyes narrowed. "Whatever nonsense this contains holds no weight," she scoffed. "You always were drama queen." Ignoring Mara's delusional barbs, I focused intently on Jude. The folder contents will speak for themselves, but allow me to summarize. For the next excruciating half hour, I calmly detailed Jude's long-running affair and sexting habits backed by photographic evidence, private investigator reports, and credit card receipts. Mara sputtered baseless denials until Jude finally admitted guilt in a choked whisper. "Well, she drove you to it," Mara shrieked. "A wife should meet her husband's needs to prevent wandering eyes." Slamming my palm violently on the table, I cut her repulsive tirade short. "You will not defend his behavior. He is a grown man responsible for his abhorrent choices." Turning my glare back to Jude, I continued, "And according to the investigator, Lola Peach is just one of several women you've maintained relations with. Jude hastily tried placating me by questioning the ethics of hiring spies, but my bone-chilling stare silenced further protests. After a few moments, I resumed my diatribe by exposing their slanderous hoax, portraying me as violent and unstable. I have signed affidavits from the responding officers and social workers strongly disputing your perjured claims, I concluded, shoving the paperwork toward them contemptuously. Watching Jude visibly withdrawing into his seat like a scorned child while Mara seethed quietly was profoundly satisfying. I rose calmly from my seat, gathering the damning evidence now scattered across the table. Consider this your one warning to cease spreading vicious lies about me to salvage your shredded reputations. I still have ample ammunition left if necessary for courtroom proceedings. Leaving them speechless amidst the upended wreckage of secrets and lies, I strode briskly towards sweet freedom. The bindings tethering me to their dysfunction now dissolved fully. I was finally free. Watching the moving truck disappear around the corner, I sighed deeply. The bittersweet pang of signing the divorce papers just hours earlier still lingered, but any residual heartache faded, standing here on the curb before my very own food truck, its cheerful teal paint gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun. My hard-won independence never tasted sweeter. In the 18 months since I confronted Jude and Mara with their deceitful transgressions, much had changed. With an excellent attorney's help, I leveraged the extensive documentation of Jude's philandering against any sympathy for Mara's fictitious abuse claims. The judge took a dim view of their elaborate hoax and utter lack of remorse, as he deemed in the divorce proceedings. Stripped of his polished veneer before the court, Jude acquiesced quickly to my terms, eager to avoid further public scrutiny. The settlement awarded me full ownership of our lavish apartment and 75% of all remaining assets. Jude slunk away in disgrace to lick his wounds, Mara in tow. She had attempted clinging to false reconciliation promises, but I wouldn't be moved. In the quiet aftermath, I blossomed in solitude's fertile soil. My writing career flourished now that energy formerly spent tiptoeing around volatility could be channeled into professional and personal growth. I traveled widely, cultivated new friendships, and most importantly, I cooked. Having rediscovered my passion for fusing flavors during darker days, I began hosting pop-up dining experiences from our apartment. My culinary skills, coupled with charming hospitality, quickly attracted a cult following. Soon, devoted patrons clamored for my signature roasted duck confit tacos and cardamom creme brulee well beyond makeshift dinner parties. When the owner of a failing food truck approached proposing partnership, the universe seemed to align perfectly with my entrepreneurial visions. I invested a chunk of savings into revitalizing the charming little hut on wheels into a truly eye-catching mobile kitchen. Bold teal paint and twinkling string lights attracted droves of curious admirers from the outset, but perhaps most satisfying was discovering genuine romance unexpectedly. During my first promotional photo shoot for Alara's, I clicked instantly with the talented photographer Graham over sharing travel tales while scouting locations. Our coffees afterwards kindled into deeper connection. Unlike Jude's love bombing, Graham's affections grew steadily out of genuine compatibility and mutual respect. On our recent trip celebrating the new truck launch, Graham mused the stunning vineyard views looked ideal for a small, intimate vow exchange someday soon. My heart fluttered hearing this wonderful man, with no ulterior motives, speak so earnestly of our future together. Just then, my reminiscing was interrupted by the loud rumble of the first guest's arrival, my dear friend and unofficial catering assistant, Eva. She had proven an invaluable pillar of support when other fair-weather friends scattered after my dizzying descent from corporate executive's wife to scandalous tabloid feature. I embraced her warmly. "Well, no backing out now," I joked. "Did those glowing Instagram stories I sent over pique your interest?" "Are you kidding? I've been craving duck tacos all week after that preview." She laughed. "Now stop keeping me from that sublime food and go wow all these strangers." Grinning broadly, I fired up the grill with infectious enthusiasm. Tonight marked the genesis of my hard-won new existence, one defined not by toxic gazes or dancers hiding in the wings waiting to step on broken dreams, instead Possibility and autonomy shone brightly, their rays feeding seeds for whatever rich future I chose to cultivate next. One scrumptious taco at a time. Welcome to the family. Adrienne's voice dripped with saccharine sweetness as she handed me a perfectly wrapped gift basket. The smug satisfaction in her eyes betrayed the innocent facade as our gazes met. I managed a polite smile as I accepted the elaborately arranged basket, concealing my unease. Adrienne had made it abundantly clear from the moment I met her that I didn't truly belong in her family's elite social circle. Her chilly disdain was expertly veiled by fake hospitality, but I recognized the game, one she'd perfected over years of keeping up appearances. Thank you, Adrienne. It's beautiful, I replied, fighting the urge to tear open the gift immediately and expose whatever passive-aggressive jab lay within. My husband Ethan beamed with oblivious pride at my side, squeezing my hand affectionately. He remained blissfully unaware of the tension simmering between his wife and sister. As the baby shower celebrations continued, Adrienne's plastic smile never wavered as she drifted between guests, the picture of graciousness. Yet when our eyes met again across the room, her gaze pierced me like sharpened daggers. Adrienne's unspoken message screamed loud and clear. This was her turf, and I would never be more than an intruder. Steeling myself, I clutched Ethan's hand tighter as we mingled among his family and their well-heeled friends. I kept the gift basket tucked securely in my arms, dreading the carefully selected insult surely wrapped within. Hours later, after the last guest had filtered out, I retreated to the bedroom and pulled off the ribbons with trembling hands. Inside the basket lay an assortment of high-end bath products and a plush terrycloth robe, all blindingly white. At the very bottom, nestled like a viper among roses, was a single sealed envelope with neat cursive script, Mara's fresh start. My heart plummeted as realization washed over me. Adrienne knew my deepest secret, the painful past I'd fought to put behind me. A past Ethan loved me enough to accept, but one his privileged family would never understand. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope to reveal a check for $10,000 and a brief note. For when you're ready to walk away and spare us the embarrassment. The message was clear. Adrienne's twisted generosity bought my silence and compliance or ensured my banishment. My mouth went dry as I crumpled the note, panic and rage clashing within me. The game had begun. But this time, I vowed to write my own rules. In the weeks following the baby shower, Adrienne's malicious games intensified. No longer content with subtle digs, she launched an all-out offensive to drive a wedge between Ethan and me. "Mara, darling," she trilled one afternoon, sweeping into the living room uninvited. "I simply had to stop by with this precious outfit for little Emma." She thrust an over-the-top frilly dress into my hands, the lace and bows dripping with saccharine excess. "It's lovely," I managed, forcing a smile. "But really, you shouldn't have." "Nonsense." Adrienne batted her eyes innocently. "Every little princess needs an outrageously impractical gown that she'll hate in a few years." My grip tightened on the offending garment as I bit back a scathing retort. Ethan remained oblivious, offering his sister an indulgent grin. "You spoil her, Addie. What would we do without you?" The words struck like a dagger, highlighting my exclusion from their privileged inner circle. Adrienne's syrupy laugh grated my nerves. "I'm simply providing the essentials that Mara's background seems to be lacking," she purred, inspecting her freshly manicured nails. The thinly veiled insult hung in the air. Before I could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed, and he excused himself, utterly missing the subtext of our exchange. Adrienne pounced the moment he left the room. "Let's be honest, Mara, you'll never fit in here, no matter how hard you try to play the part." Her smile morphed into a condescending sneer. "My family deserves better than a child of your circumstances." White-hot anger lanced through me, but I refused to rise to her bait. Adrienne wanted me doubting myself, slipping back into old insecurities. Well, two could play at keeping up appearances. Mustering my sweetest smile, I rose to face her squarely. "Thank you for the dress, Adrienne. How considerate of you to think of us." I watched with satisfaction as her brow creased ever so slightly, caught off guard by my sugary politeness. Over the following months, I matched Adrienne's passive aggression with sickly sweet gratitude at every turn. Compliments dripping with venom were met with humble acceptance, driving her to escalating levels of pettiness. "I picked up this lovely wood varnish for you," she announced one day, thrusting a can of harsh chemicals into my hands. "Wouldn't want those habits from your past resurfacing." I simply smiled and thanked her for her thoughtfulness. With each exchange, I could see the confusion and frustration mounting behind Adrienne's meticulously crafted mask. Her twisted games held no power over me anymore. For now, I'd play the role of adoring sister-in-law, but soon enough I'd shatter Adrienne's fragile facade and display her true ugliness for all to see. The reckoning was coming. I would be sure of it. The first prickles of doubt crept in a few weeks later when an anonymous package arrived at our doorstep. Adrienne's carefully orchestrated plans were escalating. "What is this?" Ethan frowned, extracting a sealed manila envelope from the plain brown packaging. "I'm not sure." I trailed off as he tore it open. Inside was a glossy photograph of me exiting a dilapidated building, head bowed against the camera's flash. The place was all too familiar, a sobriety clinic I'd attended years ago after hitting my lowest point. "Mara?" Ethan's voice was laced with a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on?" I felt the blood drain from my face as my gaze flickered to the plain logo embossed on the envelope, "A friend who cares." Of course, only Adrienne could concoct such a melodramatic, underhanded scheme. "It's from my past, before I got my life together." I swallowed hard, struggling to contain my rage. "An old haunt that's better left behind." Ethan slipped an arm around me, his brow furrowed. "Why would someone send this? Trying to dredge up ancient history?" "You'd have to ask your dear sister about that." The words slipped out in a clipped tone before I could stop them. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "Adrienne, why would you accuse her of something so horrible?" "Use your eyes, Ethan." I shoved the damning photograph into his hands. "Who else would go to such depths to try driving me away?" His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. The flicker of doubt in his eyes spoke volumes. In the days after, a heavy pall hung over our home. Ethan avoided the subject, but I could see the wariness in his movements, the questioning glances when he thought I wouldn't notice. Adrienne had planted her seeds of deception, and they were taking root. The breaking point came when I returned home from running errands to find Adrienne's car in the driveway. I braced myself for another round of her twisted mind games. "There you are!" She bounced out of the front door, all sugary smiles, Ethan trailing behind with a distracted air. "I've been simply dying to catch up." Before I could formulate a response, she looped her arm through mine and steered me towards the kitchen. "Ethan told me about that dreadful photograph," she stage-whispered with a grimace. "I can't imagine who would stoop to such lows." The sickly sweet concern in her voice was a razor's edge against my nerves. "Yes, how unfortunate," I responded flatly, pulling my arm from her grasp. "I'll be sure to thank them for reopening old wounds." Adrienne's eyes widened in exaggerated hurt. "Why, Mara? I'd never dream of inflicting such pain. You know I only want what's best for you and my beloved brother." Her saccharine tone twisted the knife deeper. "That's why I've reached out to a dear friend who specializes in personal makeovers, shall we say?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she barreled on with the air of one bestowing an act of supreme generosity. "Derek will be simply marvelous in helping you put the past where it belongs, behind you." Adrienne smiled with smug satisfaction. "Won't that be transformative?" "That's quite enough, Addie." Ethan's sharp voice cut through her self-congratulations. "If Mara wants help, she'll let us know." My heart lurched to see him rallying to my defense. A flicker of uncertainty passed over Adrienne's face, but her mask quickly reset to one of sugary concern. "Of course, you're both right. I only want to ease this difficult transition." As she swept towards the door, she tossed one last poisoned barb over her shoulder. "After all, we are family now." The door clicked shut with sickening finality. This wasn't a game anymore, it was open warfare, and I had no choice but to fight with everything I had. In the aftermath of Adrienne's latest ploy, I found an unlikely ally in Samantha, one of Ethan's cousins. She sought me out a few days later with a somber expression. "Mara, I need to talk to you about Adrienne." I braced myself, expecting another round of her manipulations. But Samantha surprised me. "I know what she's doing. The lying, the sabotage. Adrienne put me through a similar hell a few years back." Her lips tightened into a hard line. "I won't let her do that to anyone else in this family." The raw pain in Samantha's eyes stopped me cold. Suddenly, her past falling out with Adrian made sense. "You've seen her true colors, too," I murmured, realization dawning. Samantha nodded jerkily. "The fake smiles, the backhanded generosity, it's all a mind game to her. She can't stand seeing others happy if she's not the center of attention." Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists as she recounted Adrian's torment when Samantha got engaged years ago. How the so-called sisterly advice slowly muddled into discreet jabs about Samantha's fiancé's shortcomings. Innocent innuendos that planted seeds of doubt until her relationship collapsed under the strain. By the time I realized what she was doing, it was too late. Samantha whispered, anguish lacing her voice. "I lost everything that truly mattered to me because of her malice." White-hot anger lanced through me at the thought of Adrian's depravity. But I pushed it aside, focusing on the bigger picture. "We can stop this," I stated with firm resolve, "but we'll need to be smart and ready to fight fire with fire." A glimmer of hope kindled in Samantha's eyes. "You have a plan?" I nodded grimly. "One that will blow Adrian's twisted game wide open. But it has to be perfectly executed, with no margin for error." Over the next few weeks, Samantha and I constructed an airtight counteroffensive. We documented every one of Adrian's thinly veiled jabs and assembled a compelling case to present to Ethan's parents. But that was just step one. The real masterstroke involved throwing an intimate family dinner, creating a perfectly staged scenario where Adrian's vicious true nature would detonate for all to see. No more masks, no more twisted kindnesses masking her malice. As the dinner date approached, I could sense Adrian's growing desperation in her transparent overtures of bonding over wedding china patterns and baby bronzing ideas. She knew something was afoot, but couldn't pinpoint the source of her unraveling control. The night before, Samantha and I made the final preparations, every potential stumbling block accounted for. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, eyes blazing with determination. "Once we go through with it, there's no going back." I took a deep breath and nodded. "More than ready. It's time Adrian experienced the karma she's had coming for a long time." The next evening, the stage was set. With bright smiles and warm embraces, we welcomed Ethan's family into our home, playing the roles of genial hosts to perfection. Even Adrienne seemed to let her guard down fractionally as she breezed in, her trademark smugness in place. She knew how to work a crowd, a fact I was counting on. As the evening built towards its crescendo, I caught Samantha's eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Her grim smile and slight tilt of her glass was all the response I needed. Let the reckoning begin. As the dinner proceeded, the air thickened with tension. Samantha and I exchanged furtive glances, silently coordinating our every move. Adrienne, ever the mistress of performance, remained blindly oblivious to the trap being carefully laid. "Mara, darling, you simply must tell me where you found this exquisite china pattern," she gushed, running a perfectly manicured nail along the rim of her plate. "The details are just sublime." I suppressed an eye roll at her overwrought theatrics. "Oh, just a little something I picked up," I replied with syrupy sweetness. "I'm delighted you like it." Adrienne's smile stretched a touch too wide, giving her porcelain features a manic cast. "Like it? I absolutely adore it." She turned to address the rest of the table, her voice carrying just an octave too high. "Mara has such impeccable taste, don't you agree?" A few murmurs of polite agreement rippled around the table. Ethan's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, no doubt registering the undercurrent of tension. I had her squirming now, just as we'd planned. "Well, you know me," I demurred with a tinkling laugh. "I simply can't resist finding little treasures in unexpected places." Adrienne's eyes narrowed infinitesimally at the seeming barb. Samantha caught my gaze and arched a challenging eyebrow. "Game on." "In fact," I continued in a louder tone, "these plates held quite the checkered past before finding their way to me." Confused glances ricocheted around the table, but Adrienne remained laser-focused, the tightness around her eyes the only crack in her facade. "You see," I pressed on relentlessly, "they have a history of being rejected, cast aside by the very people who should have cherished them most." A muscle twitched in Adrienne's jaw, but she remained outwardly impassive. Touché. The barbs continued flying in both directions, each phrased with such exaggerated politeness that the others remained oblivious to the underlying battle being waged. Finally, in a stroke of feigned concern, Samantha interjected, "Adrian, I do hope you're not coming down with something. You look quite flushed." The harried desperation was palpable in Adrian's too bright smile now. "Whatever do you mean? I'm perfectly—" "Perhaps it's all this talk of treasures with complicated backgrounds," Samantha crooned with faux innocence. "It can be quite discomforting for those of us unaccustomed to such acquired tastes." In that moment, something inside Adrian seemed to snap. Her lips peeled back in a rictus snarl as she rounded on me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, the venom laid bare at last. "With your second-hand soul and—" The rushed self-editing was too late. Ethan's eyes went wide with shock, and a dismayed murmur reverberated around the table. Adrian froze as if realizing too late the veil had slipped in spectacular fashion. Her gaze swiveled wildly around the stunned, accusing faces staring back at her. With a garbled cry, she shoved back from the table and fled the room, leaving only a ringing silence in her wake. Finally, at long last, the truth was laid bare. I caught Samantha's eye from across the table, and we shared an exhale of grim triumph. The time for judgment had come, and Adrienne was the one found sorely wanting. The silence that followed Adrienne's exit was deafening. All eyes turned towards me, a kaleidoscope of shock, accusation, and dawning realization etched across the faces of Ethan's family. I drew a fortifying breath, letting the weight of Adrienne's unmasking settle over us all. Ethan was the first to find his voice, his expression twisting with a potent mix of anger and disbelief. "Mara, what is going on? What was she talking about? Second-hand soul?" The hurt and confusion in his eyes lanced straight through me, but I refused to buckle under the burden of Adrienne's poison. "It's about my past," I stated, keeping my voice level. "The struggles I went through before finding my way to you." I sent him a pointed look, willing him to understand. Realization flickered across Ethan's features as the unspoken truth, the former addiction I'd confided in him years ago, blazed into the open. His mother paled, grasping the implication immediately. "Adrienne?" she breathed, horror tempering her voice. Surely she didn't. I fixed her with an unwavering stare. "She's been tormenting me for months, ever since she learned about my history." Looks like her mask finally slipped. A tense silence stretched out as the implications sank in. Ethan's father was the first to find his voice, an edge of steel framing his words. "Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable." His palm slammed against the table with a resonant thud. "We'll get to the bottom of this immediately." No sooner had the declaration left his lips than a tremulous Adrienne reappeared in the doorway, hastily dabbing at her perfectly made-up eyes with a lace handkerchief, the very picture of an aggrieved victim. I don't know what came over me," she stammered unconvincingly. "The stress of hosting, it all became too much." Despite her theatrical display, something profound had shifted. Her aura of superiority and entitlement was stripped away, leaving only a shrill, flailing desperation in its wake. "Save your hollow apologies, Adrienne," Ethan bit out, his normally affable demeanor replaced by frigid condemnation. "We know about your games, your cruelty towards Mara." Her bravado faltered momentarily, then the fight reignited in her eyes with bitter defiance. "You can't possibly think I'd stand idly by while you destroyed this family's standing by dragging in." Her lip curled with naked disdain. Her kind. A collective recoil spread around the room, but I held my ground, meeting her venomous stare with stoic resolution. There would be no redemption for the likes of Adrian, not after this. That's enough. Ethan's father's voice cut through the tension like a knife, all traces of warmth extinguished. "You're clearly too far gone to be reasoned with right now." Adrian opened her mouth, defiance blazing in her eyes, but her father raised a mollifying hand. "Don't say another word you can't take back, Adrian. For now, you'll return to your apartment until you can rejoin society with a reality-based perspective." The ultimatum hung in the air like an executioner's blade. For a moment, it seemed Adrienne might rally one last poisonous counterattack. Then, just as swiftly, the fight drained from her body, leaving only a hollow, bitter husk. With a wordless hiss, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming mutely behind her. Silence reigned in the wake of her departure. I could practically sense the years of willful blindness being shed, the blinders falling away from those who'd enabled Adrian's manipulations for far too long. Eventually, it was Ethan's mother who found her voice, weariness etching the lines around her eyes. "Mara, we owe you an apology, a profound one." She shook her head slowly. "We let this ugliness happen, let Adrian run amok for reasons I can't begin to fathom." I opened my mouth to respond, but she pressed on with quiet resolution. "No more excuses. It's time we, as a family, faced the consequences of enabling a monster in our midst." Around the table, solemn nods met her words. At long last, the bitter truth was embraced. A single teardrop traced down my cheek as Ethan's arms enveloped me in a fierce, sheltering embrace. Justice and reckoning had both been served, in more ways than one. Most importantly, I'd been seen. And there was no going back now. In the days following Adrian's explosive unmasking, a palpable shift gripped the family. The sisterly bond between her and Ethan, once ironclad, had been irreparably shattered. All that remained was a haunting void where unconditional loyalty once resided. "I can't believe the depth she stooped to," Ethan murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. We were seated in the living room, replaying the events in a numb daze. How could she be so cruel, so evil? I said nothing, simply wrapping my arms around him as he grappled with the harsh reality before us. Ethan's parents entered, their expressions ashen. "We've made arrangements for Adrian," his mother began woodenly. "She'll be staying with your aunt upstate for the time being." Ethan tensed beside me, and I could sense his instinctive urge to protest, to find some thread of redemption to cling to. But his father's next words severed that futile hope. "It's not just us, son. Word is spreading about her behavior." He pinched the bridge of his nose, looking every bit his age. "The Ladies' Society has decided to disassociate from her, effective immediately." A chill lanced through me. The prestigious Ladies' Society wielded enormous social capital and influence. Being ousted was a death knell. "No," Ethan's anguished whisper said it all. He may have finally seen Adrian's toxic truth, but having it blasted across high society was another devastating reckoning altogether. Over the next few weeks, the shunning rippled outward in a withering conflagration. Friends who'd once flocked to bask in Adrian's archly curated aura now froze her out like a leper. Invitations ceased arriving. Event attendance dried up. Even the slightest interaction was scrutinized by those desperate to distance themselves from the pariah in our midst. The single-minded cruelty that had once been Adrian's calling card was suddenly, viciously reflected back on her tenfold, and she had no one to blame but her own runaway malice. I finally crossed paths with her at the country club one sunny afternoon. She was a diminished shadow seated alone at a remote patio table, shoulders slumped in uncharacteristic defeat. As I approached, her eyes flicked up, and for a fleeting instant I saw the naked hurt and bewilderment laid bare, an ugly truth she could no longer deny. Then just as quickly, the shutters slammed down. Her lips twisted in a snarl of pure unbridled loathing. "Is this what you wanted? To take everything from me? To leave me with nothing?" The venom in her words struck like a physical blow, but this time I refused to recoil. "I didn't take anything, Adrian," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "You brought this on yourself with your jealousy and hatred. This." I waved a hand at the empty, shunned tableau surrounding us. "This is just karma's shadow finally catching up." For a suspended moment, she seemed to teeter on the precipice of impotent rage and a dawning, horrified self-realization. Then her shoulders slumped, the fight visibly leaching out of her. "Just leave me be," she muttered, turning away in hollowed resignation. And with that, I did. Because the battle was long over, I'd emerged the decisive victor simply by embracing the resilience and perseverance Adrian could never comprehend. In the end, her downfall hadn't required any malicious machinations, any shadowy revenge plots. Her increasingly frantic attempts to claw her way back into society's favor only cemented her disgrace further. Like a human supernova burning itself out, Adrian's hatred had simply consumed her from within. I realized then that closure and vindication had been within me all along. All I'd needed was the strength to let karma run its implacable course. In the aftermath of Adrian's spectacular downfall, an unfamiliar sense of peace settled over our family. The constant undercurrent of tension, The minefields we'd all tiptoed through for far too long had finally been diffused. Ethan in particular seemed to stand taller. The weight of his sister's toxicity finally lifted from his shoulders. Our relationship only grew stronger from the shared trauma we'd endured and overcome. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth," he murmured one night as we readied for bed, his arms enveloping me in a tender embrace. "You tried to warn me, but I just couldn't accept how far Adrian had fallen." I pulled back and met his gaze steadily. "This wasn't your burden to carry alone, Ethan. That's what partnership means, facing the worst of storms together, not just the sunshine." Something shimmered in the depths of his eyes, profound gratitude laced with an abiding love. His kiss spoke volumes as our bodies intertwined in the gathering twilight. In the days and weeks ahead, the renewed bonds with Ethan's parents also blossomed in ways I'd never dared hope for. What had once been a tenuous, artificial connection slowly melted into genuine affection and acceptance. "We should have listened to you about Adrian from the start," his father admitted one evening over brandy and cigars. "But, well, you know the power of delusion regarding family." I nodded, understanding that all too keenly, but the hurt had faded, replaced by a world of possibility now that the wool had been ripped away. "No more deceptions," I stated, meeting his gaze levelly. "We start over from a place of honesty this time." His returning nod spoke volumes, and with it a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Even in the wider social circles that had once been Adrian's playground, our family's standing slowly rebounded. Where she had sown disgrace and alienation, we now reaped the rewards of solidarity and loyalty hard won. At a charity gala weeks later, I found myself pulled aside by the grand dame of the Ladies' Society, the same woman who had cast the irrevocable shunning of Adrian. "Mrs. Wells," she began with the barest hint of contrition tinging her gravelly voice, "I fear we may have misjudged you upon your arrival into our circle. Scurrilous rumors can be most misleading." She drew herself up, somehow managing to look down her nose at me despite her diminutive stature. "It's clear now that your poise and character were the targets of sabotage from, well, you know the source." Her lips compressed into a grim line. "Words may have been said that cannot be unsaid. Associations questioned that cannot be unbroken." I tensed imperceptibly, bracing for the inevitable slight that seemed destined to follow, but the dame's next words knocked me backward on my heels. "We would be honored if you would consider accompanying us for next month's retreat at the Hampton estate." My breath caught in my throat as I parsed the audacious overture. The Hampton retreat was the most elite, coveted social event of the season, a privilege solely for those ensconced at the upper echelons. To be invited, especially in the wake of the Adrian fallout, was tantamount to being embraced back into the innermost circle, whole and unquestioned. The message was clear. I'd survived the crucible, emerging untarnished while Adrian burned away to ash and infamy. Struggling to keep my features impassive, I inclined my head with studied grace. "The honor would be mine, Dame Elizabeth. I accept most humbly." As she bobbed her own regal acknowledgement, a warm sense of triumph bloomed in my chest. Not a retribution or conquest fueled by pettiness, but a hard-won victory over hatred and prejudice itself. This was the new foundation, wrought from adversity and perseverance. And as I turned to rejoin Ethan at my side, our fingers intertwining with unshakable solidarity, I knew our bond would be eternal. For in conquering our harshest demons from within, we'd forged an invincible bastion against whatever storms still awaited on the horizon. In the quiet of our suburban home, the words hit me like a bolt from the blue. "Isn't the baby adorable? Looks just like you." My heart skipped a beat as I stood frozen, a glass of water halfway to my lips. The voices came from the living room where my husband, Daniel, was on a video call. Curiosity mingled with a creeping unease. I tiptoed closer, peering around the corner. Daniel, usually so mundane in his conversations, had a strange look on his face. He quickly minimized the video call as I entered the room. "Hey, Claire. You're home early," he said, a little too casually. "Yeah, the traffic was light. Who were you talking to?" "Just some colleagues," he replied, avoiding eye contact. The moment lingered awkwardly before I shrugged it off and headed to the kitchen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My sister Emily's face flashed in my mind, but I quickly dismissed the thought. She'd been out of touch lately, busy with her own life, or so she said. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, the shadows of doubt crept in. Daniel and I had been drifting apart, our conversations dwindling to mundane pleasantries. Was it just the wariness of our 5-year marriage or something more? The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My role as a marketing executive, which I usually loved, felt dull and unimportant. My mind kept drifting back to that overheard conversation. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Emily, with her vibrant personality and stunning looks, had always been the center of attention. I, on the other hand, had found solace in my career, away from the shadows of comparison. I decided to call Emily. The phone rang, but no answer. I sent a text, but it remained unanswered. This wasn't like her. Emily was many things, but silent wasn't one of them. That night I confronted Daniel. "Is there something going on between you and Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What? No, of course not," he replied a little too quickly. His denial did little to quell the storm brewing inside me. The following week, I received an invitation from Emily to meet for coffee. She sounded upbeat, but there was a nervous undertone in her voice that I couldn't place. My mind raced with possibilities as I prepared for what was to come. At the cafe, Emily's smile didn't reach her eyes. She fidgeted with her coffee cup before blurting out, "Claire, I'm pregnant." The news hit me like a wave. Pregnant? My sister, who always said she wasn't ready for such commitments? But the shock was replaced by a nauseating realization. The words I had overheard came rushing back. "Looks just like you." I struggled to maintain my composure. That's great news, Em. Who's the father?" Emily hesitated, her eyes darting away. "It's complicated." My heart sank. The unspoken truth hung heavily between us. I had to know. "Is it Daniel?" Emily's silence was all the confirmation I needed. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the whispers in the corner. It all made sense now. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How could you?" My voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "Claire, I'm sorry, I never meant for this to happen." Emily stammered. I didn't wait for her to finish. I walked out of the cafe, my mind racing. This betrayal was a wound too deep, a cut too sharp. I needed to act, to make them feel the weight of their deceit. As I drove home, a plan began to form. Daniel and Emily, they would pay for what they'd done. Revenge, cold and calculated, was the only path forward. I wouldn't let them get away with shattering my world. They would learn the hard way that betrayal comes with a price. The days following the cafe were a blur of anger and disbelief. I moved through them like a ghost, my mind obsessively replaying Emily's confession and Daniel's betrayal. Work became my only refuge, a place where I could bury my emotions in deadlines and presentations. At home, I watched Daniel with a new lens, seeing him not as my husband, but as a stranger. His every gesture, every word, felt like a mockery of our marriage. I needed time to plan my next move, so I kept my knowledge of his affair hidden, wearing a mask of normalcy. One evening, as we sat at dinner, a meal I had prepared with feigned normality, I decided to probe further. "So, how's work been? Any interesting projects?" I asked, my voice steady. "It's been the usual, nothing much. Just busy with meetings and deadlines," Daniel replied, his eyes on his plate. "I see. And how's Emily? We haven't seen her in a while," I ventured, watching his reaction closely. He paused, a flicker of something crossing his face. "Emily? I don't know. We don't really talk much." I nodded, a cold rage building inside me. The lies were as effortless to him as breathing. As the days passed, I began to gather evidence. I quietly accessed Daniel's phone, uncovering a trail of messages and calls to Emily that confirmed my worst fears. Their deceit was not just a fleeting mistake, but a calculated betrayal. One night, lying in bed next to Daniel, the injustice of it all hit me. Here I was, a successful professional, a loyal wife, reduced to playing detective in my own marriage. Daniel's steady breathing next to me felt like an insult. "I can't believe you," I whispered into the darkness, my words a vow of retribution. The following week was a strategic play of gathering evidence and planning my revenge. I contacted a lawyer, discreetly setting the wheels in motion for a divorce that would leave Daniel with nothing. I also started documenting every financial transaction, preparing for the inevitable legal battle. But it wasn't just about the legalities. I wanted them to feel the burn of their actions, to suffer as I had. I began to spread hints of Emily's affair within our social circle, carefully crafting a narrative that would tarnish her reputation. I watched as the rumors took hold, seeing her once-admired image start to crumble. Meanwhile, I played the part of the dutiful wife to Daniel, all while setting the stage for his downfall. My plan was meticulous, a slow poison that would leave him reeling. The final piece came when I discovered Emily was planning a baby shower, the perfect opportunity to expose them, to reveal their sordid affair to everyone they knew. As I prepared for the day, a cold determination settled over me. This was the moment of reckoning. They would pay for their betrayal, and I would be the architect of their downfall. The baby shower was set in a quaint local hall, decorated with pastel balloons and a banner that read, "Welcome, little one." I arrived early, my heart a battlefield of anger and anticipation. As guests trickled in, I mingled, my smile a practiced mask hiding my true intentions. Emily was radiant, unaware of the storm brewing. She moved through the crowd, the picture of blissful ignorance. My resentment towards her deepened with each congratulatory hug she received. Then, as the room filled with chatter and laughter, I found the moment I had been waiting for. I clinked my glass, signaling for attention. The room quieted down, all eyes on me. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice steady. "Emily, you look absolutely beautiful today. Motherhood suits you." Emily beamed. "Thank you, Claire. That means a lot coming from you." I paused for a moment, letting the tension build. "I also think it's important for us to acknowledge the father of the child on this special day." I turned towards her, my gaze unwavering. After all, a baby is a celebration of both parents, right? The room fell into an uneasy silence. Emily's smile faltered, her eyes searching mine for an explanation. "It's just so wonderful that Emily has found happiness," I continued, my voice laced with venom, "even if that happiness is built on betrayal and deceit." Whispers erupted around the room. Emily's face drained of color, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you saying, Claire?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that the father of your child is none other than my husband, Daniel," I declared, the words slicing through the room like a knife. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Emily looked around frantically, as if seeking an escape. This isn't true. Claire, why would you say something like that?" she managed to say, her voice trembling. "Oh, but it is true, dear sister," I said coldly. "I have all the evidence. Text messages, emails, late-night calls. You two didn't do a very good job of covering your tracks." Emily's facade crumbled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Claire, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "Destroying a marriage is not a mistake, Emily. It's a choice you both made." The room was thick with tension, the festive atmosphere now a distant memory. I looked around at the stunned faces, my message delivered loud and clear. "I hope you both find happiness in the ruins you've created," I said, turning to leave the shattered celebration behind. As I walked out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out, and with it, the first step of my revenge was complete. Emily and Daniel's betrayal was now exposed for all to see, their perfect images shattered by their own selfish actions. The aftermath of the baby shower was like a wildfire, the scandal spreading through our social circles with ferocious speed. Emily's reputation, once pristine, was now tarnished with whispers of infidelity and deceit. As for Daniel, he returned home to find his belongings neatly packed in the living room, a clear message that his presence was no longer welcome in my life. "Claire, we need to talk about this," Daniel pleaded, his voice a mix of desperation and disbelief. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice icy. "Your things are packed. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay." "Please, let me explain," he implored, stepping towards me. I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Save it, Daniel. I know everything. I've seen the messages, the emails. You betrayed me, with my own sister no less. There's no coming back from that." "But I love you, Claire. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake," he stammered. "Love?" I scoffed. "Your actions speak louder than your words, Daniel. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." He looked at me, his eyes searching for a sign of forgiveness, but there was none to be found. "Where will I go?" he asked, his voice breaking. "That's not my concern. You should have thought about that before you destroyed our marriage," I replied, unmoved. As he left, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The first part of my plan was complete. Daniel was out of my life, but my revenge was far from over. The next phase was to ensure that Emily faced the full extent of her actions. I contacted a few friends in the media, providing them with enough information to fuel the scandal. The story of the affair between a respected marketing executive's husband and her sister made for sensational news. Emily's name was now synonymous with betrayal. I watched as Emily's social media accounts were flooded with hateful comments. Her once cheerful posts were now met with scorn and disdain. She called me several times, but I never answered. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The final blow came when I learned that Emily had been let go from her job. The scandal had reached her workplace, and they wanted nothing to do with the drama. She was now not only a pariah in our social circles, but also struggling financially. As I sat in my quiet, empty house, I reflected on the chaos I had created. My heart was still heavy with the pain of betrayal, but there was also a sense of empowerment. I had taken control of the situation, and in doing so, I had made them pay for their deceit. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from my revelation continued to unfold. Daniel's attempts to contact me became more desperate, but I ignored each call and message. He was no longer a part of my life, a chapter painfully closed. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Reluctantly, I answered, only to hear Emily's voice on the other end. "Claire, please, we need to talk." I hesitated for a moment before responding coldly. "What is there left to say, Emily? I know I've made a horrible mistake. I've lost everything, Claire. My job, my friends. I'm begging you, please forgive me," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Forgive you?" I replied, my tone sharp. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way. You and Daniel. There's no forgiveness for what you've done." "But I'm your sister," she sobbed. "Family is supposed to stick together." "Family doesn't do what you did," I retorted. "You made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with the consequences, just like I do." I ended the call, cutting off her pleas. The satisfaction of seeing them suffer for their actions was cold comfort compared to the void their betrayal had left in my heart. A few days later, I received a letter from Daniel's lawyer. He was filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I laughed bitterly at the irony. He had the audacity to file for divorce after everything he had done. I called my lawyer, instructing him to proceed with the divorce and ensure that Daniel wouldn't get a cent more than legally required. The divorce proceedings were swift. Daniel tried to argue for a more favorable settlement, but the evidence of his infidelity weakened his position. The court ruled in my favor, leaving him with little. In the end, Emily and Daniel were both left to face the harsh reality of their actions. Emily had become a social outcast, struggling to rebuild her life, while Daniel faced financial ruin and the loss of the life we had built together. As I signed the final divorce papers, I felt a sense of closure. I had lost a husband and a sister, but I had regained my dignity and self-respect. They had tried to break me, but I had emerged stronger. I walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright light of a new beginning. The pain of the past was still there, but it was now a part of who I was, a reminder of my strength and resilience. In the months following the divorce, I found myself in a period of introspection. The home that once echoed with laughter and shared dreams now stood silent, a constant reminder of the betrayal. Yet, amidst the solitude, I discovered a newfound strength. I immersed myself in my work, channeling my energies into creative projects and corporate strategies. My colleagues noticed the change, often commenting on my unwavering focus and innovative ideas. My professional success, however, couldn't fill the void left by the absence of a family I once cherished. One evening, as I scrolled through my social media, I stumbled upon a post from an old friend featuring Emily. The image was a stark contrast to the glamorous, confident sister I once knew. The smile was there, but the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. Beside her stood a small boy, his features a painful reminder of the past. Despite the bitterness, a part of me ached at the sight of my nephew, an innocent caught in the crossfire of our family drama. The next update was about Daniel. A mutual acquaintance had shared a post about a local charity event, and there he was, unmistakably thinner, his face wearing the signs of stress and hardship. I heard through the grapevine that he had taken a job at a small firm, a far cry from the prestigious position he held during our marriage. The man in the photo bore little resemblance to the confident, charismatic person I had fallen in love with. The realization hit me then. My revenge, though justified, had left a trail of destruction. In seeking justice for their betrayal, I had altered the course of not just my life, but theirs as well. Emily and Daniel, once integral parts of my life, were now mere shadows, lost and broken by the consequences of their actions. That night, as I lay in bed, a sense of melancholy washed over me. I had won the battle, but at what cost? The satisfaction of retribution was fleeting, overshadowed by the realization that the ties that once bound us were irreparably severed. I wondered if revenge was truly worth the price we all had paid. The weeks turned into months, and slowly the sharp edges of betrayal began to soften. I learned to find joy in the small things: a successful campaign at work, a weekend retreat with friends, the quiet moments of solitude that allowed me to reconnect with myself. In the end, the journey through betrayal and revenge taught me a valuable lesson about the complexities of human relationships and the resilience of the human spirit. I emerged from the ordeal not as a victim, but as a survivor, forged by the fires of adversity into a stronger, more self-assured individual. "Landon, you need to see this, now!" Mara's panicked voice pierced the silence of my morning routine. I froze, my spoonful of Cheerios hovering halfway between the bowl and my mouth. Mara was my neighbor, and while we were friendly, her barging unannounced into my home was unusual, to say the least. I sprang up from the kitchen island, my unease growing. "Mara, what's going on?" She gestured wildly. "It's Landon. I just went over to borrow some sugar, and he's on the floor and—" I didn't wait for her to finish. I shoved past her and raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. My mind reeled. Landon prone on the floor. Why was Mara even over here so early? Dread pooled in my stomach as terrifying possibilities flooded my thoughts. I skidded into our bedroom, my breath catching at the sight of my husband sprawled motionless on the carpet. "Landon." Kneeling, I gripped his shoulders, giving him a shake, eliciting only a faint moan. Relief washed over me. At least he was alive. I whipped around to face Mara, who hovered nervously in the doorway. "Did you call 911? She shook her head mutely. "Well, call them," I snapped, "and get me a cold cloth for his forehead." I turned my attention back to Landon, tapping his face gently. "Landon, can you hear me? Everything is going to be okay." Everything was definitely not okay. My mind reeled as I tried assessing what happened. Landon had seemed perfectly normal when he kissed me goodbye not even an hour earlier. And now here he was, unconscious. I racked my brain, trying to remember if he'd complained of any symptoms lately. He'd seemed a little more tired and distracted the past few weeks, but I'd chalked it up to his demanding work schedule. Guilt twisted my insides. Had I missed something crucial? I smoothed Landon's hair back from his clammy forehead, willing him to open his eyes, to say something. In the distance, I heard the wail of an approaching siren. Thank God the paramedics were almost here. Mara rushed back in with a wet towel, her face pinched with worry. As I laid the cool cloth on Landon's head, a tiny flare of suspicion caught in my mind. How had Mara even found Landon? She said she came over to borrow sugar, but I knew for a fact we were out. I made a mental note to question her more later. The paramedics arriving halted that train of thought. I moved back to let them work, firing off answers to their rapid queries. No serious prior medical issues. No complaints of pain recently. Yes, he seems overworked and exhausted. I stared helplessly as they loaded Landon's limp form onto a stretcher. One EMT turned to me, her expression kind but serious. "We're taking him to County Memorial. It seems he possibly had a minor heart episode or stroke. We won't know more until we run some tests." I swallowed hard, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I felt Mara come up beside me. "Bryn, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I know this is beyond shocking. Do you want me to call anyone for you?" I shook my head, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "No, I need to make those calls myself, starting with his office." I attempted a grateful look. "But thank you for finding him. If you hadn't come over—" I let the sentence trail off, an icy shiver run down my spine at the implication. She put a consoling hand on my shoulder. Of course. Let me know if you need anything at all. I offered a weak smile before going to make the necessary calls, questions about Mara still needling my brain. But first, I needed to get to the hospital and pray my husband of 15 years would be okay. Sitting in the too bright hospital room, I watched Landon sleep. The steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the heavy silence. He looked diminished somehow, lying there pale against the starched sheets, a tangle of wires and tubes connecting him to various machines. The doctors said he'd had a minor heart attack, likely brought on by stress and lack of self-care. He was lucky to be alive and should make a full recovery, but it would be a long road ahead. My relief at his prognosis was tempered by anger that he had let himself get to this point. And then there was the question of Mara and her suspicious timing in supposedly finding him. My head throbbed trying to make sense of it all. A soft rap at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Mara peeking her head in, a vase of flowers in her hands. "Hey, I didn't want to disturb you, but I wanted to drop these off for Landon." I forced a polite smile. "You're too kind. More flowers couldn't hurt in this dreary place." I gestured for her to place the arrangement on the windowsill before an awkward beat passed between us. Clearing my throat, I broke the silence first. "So, the doctors seem confident he'll recover in a few weeks." Mara's face flooded with relief as she settled into the chair next to me. "Oh, thank goodness. I've just been so worried, replaying it all in my mind. I mean, what if I hadn't randomly decided I needed to borrow sugar at that exact moment? It doesn't bear thinking about." She trailed off, absent-mindedly fidgeting with the handle of her purse. I stiffened, that nagging flare of doubt rekindled by her words. Our houses shared a backyard fence. She wouldn't have been able to see Landon collapse through a window or door. The only logical way she could have happened upon the scene was if she was already inside our home. I studied her carefully, noticing the way she avoided eye contact, focusing intently on her hands. Was it guilt I detected in her body language, or simple distress over the situation? Mara stood abruptly, breaking me from my scrutinizing reverie. "Well, I should get out of your hair, let you have some time alone with him." She stepped over to give my shoulder a brief, awkward pat. "Call if you need anything, okay?" I walked her to the door, my suspicions solidifying into resolve. As unsettled as I felt over the many unanswered questions, I knew now wasn't the time to confront her, not while Landon's condition remained uncertain. But the moment he was cleared to come home safely, I would get to the bottom of Mara's bizarre behavior. I was through with politely ignoring the signs something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and home, maintaining an exhausting vigil over Landon's recovery. My parents flew in from Florida to offer their support, giving me both moral support and a break from the endless hospital stays. Landon's progress was slow but steady, until late one week when his doctor finally gave clearance for him to finish recuperating at home. My parents departed back south, with firm instructions for me to call if I needed anything else. The morning after I got Landon settled in at home, I steeled myself and marched over to Mara's place, determined to get answers. When she opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. "Bryn, I didn't know you were stopping by." I folded my arms across my chest, fixing her with an even look. "We need to talk. Now." Mara paled slightly but stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. I crossed the threshold, setting the stage for a long overdue confrontation. I sat ramrod straight on Mara's plush white couch, clutching my cell phone like a lifeline. She settled into the armchair adjacent, her eyes wary. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked with forced brightness. I shook my head curtly. "No, I'm here for answers." Mara smoothed her hair back, letting out a nervous titter. "Answers? About what?" My eyes narrowed, honing in on her discomfort. "Let's start with how exactly you happened to find my husband unconscious. Want to run that by me again?" Mara looked down, picking at a thread on her jeans. "Well, like I told you, I came over to borrow something. I noticed the front door was ajar, which was unusual, so I went inside to check if everything was okay. That's when I found Landon passed out." I let out a harsh scoff. "That's quite the revised history, Mara, because when you first told me about it at the house, you distinctly said you came over for sugar." I leaned forward. "We both know I didn't have any sugar for you to borrow. So what's the real story?" Her eyes flashed with what looked like anger before being quickly replaced with faux confusion. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Bryn," she said carefully. "It was a traumatic morning. I must have misremembered the exact details." We sat in tense silence, both refusing to break eye contact first. I decided to switch tactics. "You mentioned the other day at the hospital how lucky it was you happened to randomly decide to come over when you did, but considering the state of my front door, it's pretty clear the timing wasn't just coincidence. Was it, Mara?" Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, cheeks reddening. I pressed on, urgency creeping into my voice. "He's my husband. I deserve the truth. What is going on between you two?" Abruptly, Mara stood. "I think you should leave now." Her voice was cold, all pretense vanishing. I followed suit, refusing to be deterred. "Not until you start being honest. I'm no fool. I know something is happening behind my back." My voice broke on the last word. Mara stepped closer, rage twisting her features. "Careful, Bryn," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're starting by making wild accusations. Some things are better left alone." I reeled back. Was that a threat? Before I could respond, Mara yanked open the front door. "I believe it's time for you to go," she said icily. Temporarily speechless, I allowed myself to be herded outside. Mara's ominous words echoed in my ears as she slammed the door in my face. I stood frozen on the steps for several long beats, shaking with a melange of emotions, confusion, anger, hurt. It was painfully clear Mara was tangled up with Landon in some capacity. Her hostile reaction had only amplified my worst fears. By the time I got back home, steely determination had eclipsed the stunned hurt I initially felt. I knew now I couldn't rely on either Mara or Landon to give me the whole truth willingly about whatever was between them. Fortunately, I still had one ace up my sleeve, someone who could help me expose the rot at the core of my marriage, a private investigator. After witnessing Mara's volatile response up close, I no longer cared if drastic measures were required. One way or another, I was getting the proof I needed to force Mara and Landon's deceit into the harsh light. I opened my laptop, hands steady as I searched for the best investigator money could buy. I drummed my fingers on my desk, hitting refresh on my email for the 10th time in as many minutes. I was awaiting the preliminary report from Mick Walsh, the private investigator I hired a week prior, anxious to see if he uncovered any substantial evidence of Landon's duplicity. My knee bounced with nervous energy as I once again scanned through my inbox. Finally, a new message appeared at the top, Mick's name flashing in bold. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I clicked it open. My eyes raced across the page, hands beginning to tremble halfway through digesting the attached photos and Mick's analysis. It was worse than I thought. Apparently, Landon and Mara's trysts had started over 6 months ago. My mind reeled as I examined photo after photo of them ducking into seedy motels, kissing on park benches, and holding hands during intimate restaurant meals. Acid roiled in my stomach at the realization that Landon hadn't just cheated, he was living a completely separate life with Mara behind my back. I shoved my chair back from the desk, bile rising in my throat. I barely made it to the bathroom before I lost the meager contents of my stomach. Gripping the toilet seat until my knuckles turned white, guttural sobs racked through me. Through the echoing anguish in my ears, one thought broke through the torrential hurt. I wanted revenge. No, I corrected myself. I deserved revenge. Splashing icy water on my face, I regarded my reflection in the mirror. The shell shock was gone, replaced by icy determination. I knew then I wouldn't be satisfied with simply confronting Landon over his betrayal. I wanted consequences. Steep, life-altering consequences not just for him, but for Mara too. I wanted them humiliated, ostracized from their social circles and careers. Proof of their lies made public for all to see. The Altoids website said revenge was best served cold. Well, Mara and Landon were about to experience my icy vengeance firsthand. My mind whirled as I began meticulously plotting each step, moving into a calculated chess match I intended to win at all costs. First, I texted Mara from Landon's phone, requesting she come over the next day to talk. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the bait. Next, I drafted an email to our entire neighborhood watch group, emphasizing that Mara and my husband had urgent news to share with all at the community park tomorrow evening. The neighbors would be surprised, but they were sure to spread the word like wildfire. Finally, I scheduled a morning meeting with my lawyer. While I didn't plan on immediately filing divorce papers, I wanted my options mapped out ahead of time before dropping the bomb on Landon. Satisfied I had set all the necessary groundwork, I poured myself a large glass of wine and retreated to the guest bedroom. I refused to sleep another night in the bed Landon had callously defiled. Swirling the crimson liquid, I allowed myself a small smile. Let Mara and Landon enjoy their last evening together before their world imploded. Tomorrow I was dragging their lies into the disinfecting sunlight for everyone to see. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, energized by the promise of redemption. I awoke well before dawn, adrenaline already thrumming through my veins. Today was the day I would finally expose Landon and Mara's betrayal after weeks of secrecy and lies. I dressed methodically, donning an outfit that presented strength and confidence. I needed to project control and power when I confronted them. In the muted early morning light, I found myself gazing around the home Landon and I had shared for over a decade, seeing it with new eyes. I trailed my fingers over the wedding photo on the fireplace mantel, two smiling strangers frozen in time, blissfully unaware of the future wreckage of their vows. Bile rose in my throat as I now noticed other traces of Mara peppered throughout the house. The throw pillow she gifted us last Christmas, the botanical calendar from her small business posted in the kitchen. Proof she had seamlessly infiltrated the inner sanctum of my home and marriage for months without my knowledge. Well, it ended today. I finished my coffee, relieved to hear Landon stirring upstairs, readying himself for the ambush ahead. The doorbell rang right on schedule at 9 a.m. sharp. I opened it to find Mara on the doorstep, concern etched on her face that I knew now was just a facade. "Bryn, is everything okay?" Landon's text had me worried. She tried peering around me. "Is he here?" I stepped aside in cold silence, allowing her entry as I sent the pre-written text instructing the neighborhood watch members to gather at the park at noon. I wanted an audience for the final act. Mara perched awkwardly on the couch while I informed Landon he had a visitor. He came trotting eagerly down the stairs, but pulled up short at the sight of me standing rigidly behind a confused-looking Mara. I broke the tension, keeping my voice neutral and calm. "Well, isn't this cozy? My husband and his mistress chatting over morning coffee." Mara leapt up as Landon spluttered. "Bryn, it's not what you think." His eyes were wide with panic. I held up a hand. "Save it. I know everything, have proof of it all, photos, dates, the whole sordid timeline, so you can drop the wounded confusion act." "You crazy bitch," Mara seethed, posture taut like a snake about to strike. "I told you to leave this alone. Now you've ruined everything." I let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Oh, I've ruined everything? That's rich, coming from the backstabbing harlot sleeping with my husband." Mara lunged forward, but I didn't flinch. "Listen very carefully. You both have 5 minutes to get out of my sight, because in less than an hour you're going to admit publicly everything you've done." I smiled coldly. "Don't worry, I've invited all the neighbors over already." Ignoring their spluttering protests, I turned on my heel and strode away, pausing at the doorway. I'd use this time wisely to start coming up with one hell of an apology. I left them standing slack-jawed amidst the rubble of their lies. Soon, everyone would know the truth. Justice was at hand. The sunny afternoon air felt sharp and brittle against my skin as I approached the neighborhood park. I spotted many familiar faces milling about, checking phones and murmuring with confusion about the urgent summons. Good, word had spread quickly. I climbed atop the picnic table at the front, clearing my throat loudly. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know you're wondering what this is about." I paused, pulse thundering in my ears. "I've asked you here because my husband and neighbor have an important announcement regarding their relationship." I stepped back as nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. Right on cue, Mara and Landon rounded the corner, arm in arm. I watched impassively as they took in the scene before them, dozens of pairs of eyes staring, rapt with attention. Landon dropped Mara's arm like she was on fire, taking a half step away from her. "Bryn, what the hell is going on?" he hissed under his breath. Ignoring him, I smiled icily at the gathering. "Go ahead, you two. The floor is yours." Mara looked wildly between the staring faces and me, hatred in her gaze. I met it coolly, arms folded in front of me, refusing to let my smile drop. Her shoulders slumped slightly as the defiance seeped from her frame at seeing the undeniable proof rimming her in on all sides. Her voice came out hoarse when she finally found it. "Fine, Bryn, you win." She wrung her hands, words directed at the ground. "Landon and I have been seeing each other romantically behind Bryn's back for several months now." A collective gasp arose from the crowd. My triumph only grew as Mara glanced again at the crowd's disgusted faces. I raised a brow, prompting her to continue. I knew he was married, but I didn't care, and he pursued me relentlessly until I gave in." At this, Landon made a small strangling sound, but I silenced him with a quelling glare. Mara pressed a hand to her cheek, but forced herself to meet the eyes boring into her. "Our affair has completely betrayed Bryn's trust. I'm ashamed of my behavior." Her voice dropped to a tortured whisper. "I'm so very sorry." The ladies in the group immediately clustered around me, murmuring words of sympathy and support. I accepted their comfort graciously, keeping my gaze fixed on Mara and Landon's slumped forms standing alone amidst the recriminations swirling around them. The consequences were only just beginning for those two. As the afternoon stretched on, Mara's business partner and close friend cornered me, disgust etched on her face. "Bryn, I had no idea about Mara's behavior, but it's completely unacceptable. Consider her business partnership with me dissolved effective immediately." I graciously accepted her heartfelt apology on behalf of Mara's actions. As I watched her walk away to inform Mara, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. My plan was working perfectly. Mara and Landon's lies were exposed to everyone they cared about, with professional and social consequences already piling up. The best revenge truly was living well. And I was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched with satisfaction as Mara and Landon's world steadily crumbled around them. True to her word, Mara's business partner dropped her. She had to close her fledgling soap company as key clients and corporate sponsors pulled out. Horrified by the social media fallout surrounding her now very public affair, internet support swelled for me, as people praised my courage in dragging her deceit into the light. And while I fielded calls from sponsors willing to provide aid, Mara remained in a fierce downward spiral. Her formerly glossy social channels were flooded with hate and criticisms decrying her manipulative personality. For Landon, the professional retribution took longer, as many of us clients were tied to lengthy contracts with his firm. But small signs of demise showed: critical online reviews, a slow drop-off of calls for new properties. Then finally, blessedly, 2 of his largest clients sent termination letters, citing his profound personal lapse in moral judgment. I celebrated his misery from my guest room sanctuary, grateful I still had legal right to remain in our shared home through the divorce proceedings. Our relationship grew beyond frigid interactions limited to curt, mechanical conversations regarding household affairs. During one such exchange, Landon clenched his fists at his sides. "Bryn, this is madness. You've taken it too far. Mara and I's jobs." I cut him off coolly. "Landon, you lost the moral high ground when you cheated on your wife for half a year. You're simply experiencing the consequences." Ignoring his outraged spluttering, I continued. "I met with my lawyer and drew up a settlement agreement. You'll receive 30% of assets and forfeit our shared real estate commissions and equity." Landon gaped like a fish struggling for air. "You can't just change our prenup like that." I laughed sharply. "Oh, I most certainly can in cases of adultery with legal proof." I fixed him with a steely gaze. "You're getting off easy. I suggest signing without further argument." Landon looked ready to spontaneously combust for several seconds before slumping in defeat. "You're a vindictive, soulless shrew," he whispered harshly. "You've ruined our futures over an affair." My eyes blazed with cold fire. "You want to lecture me about ruining futures and betrayal? How rich? I'm not the villain here. I just refuse to be your victim either." I shoved the thick envelope toward him. "Sign it or face a uglier, messier legal battle." After a long, seething beat of silence, he bitterly scrawled his name across the document, sealing his financial ruin. As I showed him the door, a profound wave of cathartic relief crashed over me. This painful chapter was finally closed for good. Later that night, as I opened a nice bottle of wine to celebrate a battle hard won, my phone rang with Mara's number flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her words came out in broken half-sobs. Why couldn't you just let it go, Bryn? Why did you have to destroy us so completely over one mistake? I allowed myself one beat of delicious satisfaction, hearing her misery before I hung up without another word. I turned my phone off and raised my glass in a solitary toast to new beginnings. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. I stood in the entryway of my cozy new condo, hands on my hips as I surveyed the sleek space where I was starting fresh. The divorce was finalized last week, leaving me with complete ownership of this place all my own. Landon got the house, which needed extensive repairs anyway, and I received a sizable settlement after the kids and I sold it. I crossed to the balcony doors, smiling as I gazed out at the pleasing skyline view. It had been an emotionally tumultuous season, but with the hardest parts behind me, I finally allowed myself to relax into the next chapter. The private investigator I hired out of a mad rush to expose the affair had become a close confidant during the messy showdown and aftermath. Over enchiladas one warm evening, Mick made me a money-making offer to spin my story into a series for a local podcast network looking for gripping content. I jumped on it eagerly, not just for the paycheck, but because it proved the best revenge is indeed living well. Today marked the debut episode release featuring my recounting of the betrayal. My producer texted to say the analytics looked promising for solid listenership. I couldn't wait to finally give my side and relinquish the bitterness and pain that clung to me like cobwebs for so long. It was time to shake off the darkness of deception and walk freely into the light again. I spent the afternoon in a flurry of activity preparing to host a small listening gathering that evening in my new condo for the first episode's drop. My doorbell rang promptly at 6 o'clock and I opened it to find Zoe, my closest girlfriend who stuck firmly by my side as an ally during the whole saga. Her compassionate strength provided a lifeline through many tearful nights. We hugged fiercely before she held me at arm's length, assessing me with a warm smile. It's so wonderful to see that spark back in your eyes, Bryn. You look stunning as always, but now you're glowing from within again too. I squeezed her hand, overcome with gratitude, as a few other dear friends arrived to show their support. We settled in the living room, with glasses of wine and snacks to listen. Their gasps and murmurs of outrage in all the right places brought a sense of deep comfort. I wasn't alone in this anymore. As the episode wrapped up with a preview for part 2, my circle of friends erupted into exuberant applause. I dabbed the corners of my eyes, unexpectedly overcome. Zoe stood, raising her glass. To our amazing, courageous, justice-serving friend, Bryn. Not all heroes wear capes. Everyone echoed her sentiments as we clinked glasses. Zoe enveloped me in another fierce hug as the well wishes continued flowing. I'm so proud of you for telling this story on your own terms. Now everyone will know the truth and the 2 dirtbags behind it all. I sighed contentedly, feeling lighter than I had in ages. The party and camaraderie flowed late into the evening before my guests trickled out with last hugs and promises to meet again soon. Alone again in my peaceful sanctuary of a home, I raised my glass in a private toast. To living courageously after betrayal, and the joy of taking back my life on my own terms without apology. The long road here was worth every step. You greedy bastards, I muttered under my breath. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hidden outside my father's study, I listened in shocked disgust as my mother and brother casually discussed how they would benefit financially from my dad's impending death. With Marshall gone, we'll finally get our hands on the inheritance, my brother Declan said. His business is worth millions, but we need to act fast before his conditional will locks us out. I've waited decades for that old fool to die, my mother Evelyn snapped. We deserve that money more than anyone. I felt sick with rage. My father had devoted his entire life to building his craft brewery company. He had started from nothing, working tirelessly while selflessly giving back to our community. And now, as he lay terminally ill with lung cancer, his own family schemed to seize his hard-earned legacy. I burst into the study, unable to restrain myself. You should both be ashamed, I bellowed. Dad is fighting for his life, and all you care about is money? Evelyn gasped theatrically. Ryder, what are you doing, eavesdropping on us? I ignored her attempt to flip the script. I heard enough. You plan to manipulate Dad's will and steal his company for your own gain. Declan snickered. Half-brother, you're too soft for your own good. Stay out of this if you know what's best for you. My hands curled into fists. I had to take a slow breath to contain my fury. We may only share one parent between us, but Declan and I grew up as brothers. This betrayal cut deep. Evelyn chimed in with her usual manipulation. Sweetheart, we only want what's fair for our family. I cut her off sharply. Fair? You insult Dad on his deathbed after everything he's done for you. I shook my head in disgust. In that moment, I knew where my loyalties lay. I'll be visiting Dad in the hospital now, I said coldly. Do what you want. I'll protect his legacy at all costs. I turned and strode out, determined to put as much distance between myself and those deceitful snakes. My mind raced as I jumped into my old pickup truck. I refused to let them steal everything my father worked for, but I was just one man against their machinations. As I drove to the hospital where Dad lay clinging to life, one thing became crystalline clear. This brewing war between us would only end once justice had been served. My so-called family pinned their greed above all else, but they didn't yet realize one thing. Never underestimate my devotion to the man who raised me. I aimed to honor my father, no matter the cost. The pungent smell of antiseptic filled my nose as I walked through the bustling hospital corridors. The sterile environment only amplified the gravity of why I was here, to see my dad, Marshall, as he endured the final agonizing stages of lung cancer. I stepped into his room, and the sight of his gaunt, weakened frame pierced my heart. Yet when he saw me, his face still lit up. "Ryder, my boy, so good of you to visit your old man," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I grasped his bony hand, holding back tears. "Hey, Dad," I said, managing a sad smile. "How are you feeling today?" He dismissed my question with a wave. "Ah, still kicking, but enough about me. Tell me what's new with you." Even now, he thought of everyone but himself. I swallowed hard. "I got a new contract to design some beer labels for a client in Austin. Should be a fun campaign." "Glad to hear the graphic design business is booming." Dad's smile radiated pride. "You've done so well for yourself, son. I always knew you were destined for great things." I felt a pang in my chest, recalling his unwavering support when I decided to leave college and chart my own path as an entrepreneur. He never stopped believing in me, which made what I had overheard earlier even more difficult. As if reading my thoughts, Dad squeezed my hand. "Ryder, promise me something. No matter what happens, stay true to yourself. Don't let money or other people change who you are." My throat tightened with emotion. After a pause, I met his earnest gaze. "Of course, Dad, I promise." He nodded, seeming to relax back into his pillow. Just then, the door swung open, admitting my mother and Declan. I stiffened. "Oh, Marshall, we've been so worried." Evelyn gushed dramatically, embracing Dad. Behind her fake smile, I sensed cold calculation. Declan hung back, feigning concern. "We came as soon as we heard the news. How bad is it?" I gritted my teeth. "Did they have no shame?" Dad patted Evelyn's hand. "It's terminal, I'm afraid, but I've made my peace with it." His eyes flashed defiantly. "My affairs are all in order." Declan and Evelyn exchanged a subtle, frustrated look. My hands curled into fists. They were like vultures, impatiently waiting to pick my father's bones clean. I stood abruptly. "I should get going. Feel better, Dad." As I left, I paused beside Declan. Through clenched teeth, I muttered, "This isn't over. I meant what I said." He smirked. "Still clinging to those foolish principles, brother? When will you open your eyes and seize the opportunity before you?" My blood boiled at his sneering words. Without replying, I stormed out before I did something I'd regret. Driving home, Dad's earnest words echoed in my mind. No matter how hard Evelyn and Declan tried to destroy his legacy, I refused to compromise who I was. Dad built his brewery empire from the ground up, with unfailing integrity. Now it was up to me to safeguard everything he worked for from those deceitful jackals. Failure was not an option. I owed that much to the man I loved as a father. Resolve stealing within me, I drove onward through the gathering dusk. The fight for my dad's legacy had only just begun. I strode through the hospital's sliding doors, a bouquet of daisies in hand, Dad's favorite. The nurses at the front desk waved in somber recognition. After so many visits these past few agonizing weeks, I knew this place like a second home now. "How is he today?" I asked Helen, an older nurse who cared for Dad daily. She smiled gently. He pushed through the night, but he's fading fast. Spend all the time you can with him. I nodded, throat tightening. Thank you. For everything. She squeezed my arm in quiet empathy before I continued down the hall. Step by step, I steeled myself for what I knew would be one of the last times I'd speak to my father. I paused outside his room, taking a deep breath. When I entered, the sight of him knocked the wind out of me. His shrunken frame barely made a contour under the stark white sheets. His breathing sounded painfully labored. Machines beeped and whirred, temporary guardians against the inevitable. Dad slowly turned to me, his eyes lighting up when they met mine. "Ryder," he rasped, raising a trembling hand. I rushed forward, grasping it firmly as I sat beside him. "Hey, Dad," I said gently. "I brought you something." I raised the daisies, conjuring a faint smile to my lips. He inhaled their sweet scent. "My favorite. You always had a knack for knowing just what I needed." I squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. We sat in poignant silence for several moments. Despite the whirs and beeps punctuating the air, an aura of profound peace surrounded us. All that mattered was simply being present, side by side. After a while, Dad met my gaze. "Ryder, promise me you'll look after the brewery. My employees depend on it." I nodded firmly. "Of course. I swear I'll protect your legacy, Dad." He studied me with sudden intensity. "No matter who tries to wrest it from you, stand resolute. Blood means far less than integrity and grit." I swallowed hard. So he did know of Evelyn and Declan's vile schemes. "I understand," I said quietly. "And I meant what I said. I won't let them win." Dad relaxed back with a look of satisfaction. We lapsed into easy conversation about happier memories over the years. For a beautiful, bittersweet interval, we indulged in nostalgia, smiles and laughter punctuating the poignant mood. Too soon, Dad grew drained. His replies came slower, his eyes heavier. I gave his hand one last squeeze and stood. "Get some rest. I'll come back tomorrow." I bent and gently kissed his cool, pale forehead. He gave a faint nod, already fading off. My heart splintered, knowing our remaining time together was now mercilessly short. I left the hospital in a gloomy daze. Getting into my truck, I glanced up and froze. Parked nearby sat a sleek black Mercedes I knew all too well. Evelyn and Declan emerged from the hospital doors, walking with brusque purpose. Evelyn fussed with her ostentatious jewelry while Declan talked urgently. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, their expressions said everything. Like vultures still greedily circling, desperate to pick the bones clean the moment their chance arrived. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I observed their schemes continuing literally over Dad's deathbed. Resolve coursed through me, stealing my spine. Come what may, those deceitful snakes would not claim my father's life work. I swore that solemn oath on his very name, a name that, unlike them, actually meant something. I sat hunched over my drawing table, blearily sketching label concepts as I tried tuning out the world. Losing myself in work was the only respite from the relentless dread from Dad's prognosis that haunted me. As I reached for my coffee mug, voices sounded from the hallway. I paused, recognizing Evelyn and Declan's shrill tones drifting from Dad's study nearby. Curiosity piercing through my gloom, I quietly crept toward their half-open door, keeping hidden. "The revised will is almost ready," Declan said. "My guy assured me the substituted documents will hold up fine in probate." Evelyn scoffed. "It better. We already greased that lawyer's palm enough." I bristled with outrage. So that's why Declan's fancy Mercedes had sat parked outside some high-rise law office building when I'd spotted it downtown recently. They were circumventing Dad's true last wishes by tampering with his will. "With Marshall on his deathbed, the timing's perfect to file these," Declan continued. "By the time anyone contests, we'll have the inheritance and brewery secured." "And you're certain Marshall left you and Ryder equal shares?" Evelyn asked sharply. "We can't risk that stubborn fool blocking us like always." Declan snorted. "Please, Ryder's an idealistic pushover, blinded by sentiment. He'll be easily manipulated once the old man's gone." Red-hot fury surged through me. Jaw clenched, I stormed into the study. "How dare you!" I thundered. Evelyn and Declan spun toward me, eyes wide. Evelyn recovered first. "Ryder, what nonsense are you shouting about now?" She tittered nervously. I jabbed an accusing finger. "I heard everything. You two make me sick," I vowed through gritted teeth. "I'll die before I let you steal Dad's legacy," Declan sneered. Bold words, little brother, but you're no match for us. He snatched the forged documents off the desk and brushed past me, Evelyn following hastily. At the doorway, they paused. Evelyn's smile held wicked triumph. Don't worry, darling. We'll take good care of the inheritance. Their mocking laughter trailed behind them as they departed. I stood trembling, overwhelmed by fury and frustration. Dad still clung to life while these ghouls eagerly awaited his demise to plunder what he held most dear. I couldn't let them win, but I was just one man. If I confronted them directly, things could get ugly fast. I'd need help to defeat their schemes. Grabbing my truck keys, I strode outside towards downtown, my stampeding thoughts bent on only one goal: finding a ruthless attorney to aid my cause before Declan and Evelyn filed those forged documents. One way or another, I refused to let my father's life's work, his most precious legacy meant to benefit so many, get devoured by those deceitful monsters. The brewery's rightful future now rested on my shoulders alone. I just prayed I could endure the brutal fight ahead. I sat at Dad's bedside, gloom settled on my shoulders like a leaden weight. His health spiraled rapidly now, his lucid moments growing shorter. But today he seemed strangely at peace. His eyes shone clear and bright as he studied me. "You seem troubled, son," he finally rasped. "What's on your mind?" I debated deflecting, not wanting to stress him further, but something in his steady, knowing gaze gave me pause. Dad always had a sage way of reading people. I sighed heavily. "It's Evelyn and Declan. They plan to contest your will and steal the brewery once you're gone." I overheard them scheming. Bitterness tainted my admission. Dad showed no surprise, merely nodding. "Declan made contact with some shady attorney downtown. They'll likely file forged documents after the funeral to override your true wishes," I continued. "I'm trying to stop them, but my helpless frustration choked off further words. Dad lay a comforting hand on my arm. "Ryder, you underestimate your old man. I've safeguarded my legacy better than you realize." Amusement glinted in his tired eyes. "As for Declan's attorney, he's actually on retainer in my service, has been for years." I gaped, confusion swirling through my gloom. Dad went on. "The papers Declan paid him to draft are clever forgeries, good enough to dupe those two vultures once I'm gone." His mouth quirked with quiet triumph. "But ultimately powerless." Stunned understanding dawned on me. Dad had cunningly orchestrated a trap, one scheduled to spring shut right on Declan and Evelyn's heels when they inevitably raced to plunder his fortune. "So you outmaneuvered them, just like that?" I stammered. Dad chuckled softly. "Son, when you've built an empire like I have, you learn a few things. And keeping friends close while keeping potential enemies closer is one rule I've never forgotten." His smile held profound satisfaction. Declan and Evelyn's greed blinded them to the long game I've had in play this whole time. My true plans are safely encoded where they'll never access them. I slowly shook my head in awe. Even now, Dad remained 3 steps ahead. He clasped my hand tightly. "Ryder, you and I know what truly matters in this life, and it sure as hell isn't money." Resolve stealing his voice, he continued. "Swear to me now that you'll use your inheritance only for good. To lift others up, the brewery can transform so many lives." I firmly gripped his fragile hand between mine. "I swear it, Dad, on my life." He studied me intently for a long moment before relaxing back, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. The cunning strategist who built an empire from nothing had secured his final victory, outfoxing the opportunists who sought to tear it all down. Leaving later as the winter sun sank low, I felt Dad's steady hand still grasping mine. Our solemn pact resonating with destiny's pull. The brewery's future now rested solely in my guardianship. But somehow, I didn't feel alone. Dad's spirit would remain beside me, guiding my next moves, and when the time inevitably came, his master strategy would deliver justice once and for all. Of that, I became powerfully certain. The long game was still in ruthless play. I tugged at my tie, the black fabric suddenly feeling like a noose cinched around my throat. Dad's attorney, Mr. Silver, had gathered Evelyn, Declan, and I here, a week after the funeral, to execute Dad's will. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the solemn service. As far as they knew, the revised documents Declan provided were now legal and binding. The brewery would soon be theirs, if only they knew what was coming. Almost against my will, I felt a swell of dark anticipation. Right on time, Evelyn and Declan swept in, their tailored mourning clothes unable to disguise their rapacious confidence. Clearly, they both expected this would be a quick, clean coup. They pointedly ignored me as we all sat. Mr. Silver cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss Marshall's last will and testament." Withdrawing a sealed manila envelope, he slid on his glasses. "Let's proceed." Evelyn shifted forward eagerly in her seat, while Declan lounged back, oozing a casual smugness that nearly made me lunge across the table at him. I focused on keeping my composure. "To my beloved wife Evelyn," Mr. Silver read aloud, "I leave sole ownership of our 20-acre Aspen vacation property and a lump sum allowance of $500,000 to sustain your lifestyle indefinitely." Evelyn blinked rapidly, blindsided. Her entitlement had clearly expected the entire brewery empire, not some backup retirement package. Declan shot her an irritated glare, as if this was somehow her fault. Meanwhile, a fierce swell of satisfaction rose in my chest. I could practically envision Dad's smug grin right now at his ultimate checkmate. Clearing his throat again, Mr. Silver proceeded to the next section, addressing Declan. "To my son Declan, I leave a lump sum of $300,000. Declan jolted forward in disbelief. "What? That's all?" He seized the documents, frantically scanning the terms. Mr. Silver gave him a long look over his glasses. "As specified in your father's will, that inheritance comes with stipulations. You will receive it incrementally over the next 5 years, provided you maintain verified employment and refrain from engaging in further illegal activities, which we will be monitoring closely." Declan's face purpled, clashing horribly with his crimson hair. He spluttered incoherently, years of entitled expectations crashing down on him all at once. Somewhere I was certain Dad watched with deep satisfaction. I almost felt pity for Declan. Almost. But after everything he and Evelyn put our family through, his misery seemed only just punishment. Finally, Mr. Silver turned his attention to me. Holding my gaze, he announced, "Ryder, to you Marshall leaves full ownership of the brewery." "No," Evelyn shrieked, shooting to her feet. "That company belongs to me." In that moment, her polished veneer evaporated, exposing her for the desperate, greedy opportunist she was. Declan only stared hollowly into space, the reality of his severed silver spoon smothering any reaction. I weathered their outbursts calmly, letting a small, satisfied smile tug at my lips. In his final act, Dad utterly outmaneuvered them all. Justice came for those who poisoned our family with greed. And now the company Dad built from the ground up was protected, its future preserved to keep his spirit alive. "The handcuffs you slipped years ago finally locked tight today around your greedy hands," I muttered. "Rest in that uneasy peace." As Declan and Evelyn unleashed their impotent fury within the trap Marshall built years ago, I simply sat back, savoring my father's last perfect victory. In the weeks following the explosive will reading, I threw myself into learning the brewery business. As Dad's hand-picked successor, I needed to understand every aspect of the company now under my stewardship. I toured the grounds, talking with employees and learning their roles hands-on. The seasoned workers taught me the intricate brewing process, from selecting premium ingredients right down to bottling and distribution. As I reviewed accounting records, the picture came into clear focus. Dad built this empire from the ground up, showing me the deeper meaning behind his years of endless work. The company meant far more than profit margins to him. It meant community. Jobs for hundreds, partnerships with local farms, families sustained for generations. The brewery wove lives together in a way I never fully appreciated until now. Late one evening, as I finalized a new hire's papers, loud shouts rang out from the parking lot. I rushed outside to investigate. My gut tightened at what I saw. Evelyn and Declan stood screaming at Tham, Dad's loyal head brewer of 20 years. In the shadows lurked several suited men with hard expressions. Evelyn's usually polished blonde hair hung in frazzled strands as she jabbed a finger at Tham. "You have no right to block us," she shrilled. "Marshall promised us control." Tham stood firm, arms crossed. "This is Mr. Ryder's brewery now, as Mr. Marshall wanted. I aim to uphold his wishes." Declan grabbed Tom's shirt, wrenching the older man close. "Tell us the access codes to the system mainframe now," he growled, "or my associates will convince you the hard way." The suited men cracked their knuckles, malice glinting in their eyes. Tom paled but lifted his chin. "I won't betray Mr. Marshall's son. Do your worst." Rage exploded within me. I stalked forward, muscles coiled tight. "Let him go!" My shout echoed sharply. Everyone froze. Evelyn recovered first, her smile dripping false sweetness. "Ryder, darling, we were just having a chat with Tom here." I cut through her facade with a blistering glare. "Get off my property, now." Declan released Tom hastily as they scrambled to their car. Pausing, Evelyn hissed at me, "You'll pay for this," before peeling out down the road. I watched them go, chest heaving. So now they resorted to threats and violence, revealing desperation to reclaim what they considered their lost inheritance. Well, that was never happening. I turned to Tom, who gave me a grateful nod. In that small gesture, I recognized the deeper bond of trust Dad and Tom shared now flowing to me. As we walked back inside, steely purpose took root within me. Evelyn and Declan wanted war? Fine. For the brewery, for Dad, and for Tom, I would give them absolute hell. No more playing nice. That time ended when they laid hands on my people and tried dismantling Dad's legacy. If those snakes wanted a fight, I would rain fire on their ambitions until only ashes remained. My father's company now lived through me, and I protected what was mine. I signed the last document with a satisfied flourish before leaning back in my leather office chair. It had taken months of legal battles, but Evelyn and Declan's desperate attempts to seize Dad's company had finally failed. They put up a vicious fight at first, using every ruthless tactic imaginable to undermine me. Bribery, threats, lawsuits. But I refused to cave. Armed with Dad's ironclad will and evidence gathered against them over the years, I systematically demolished their campaign. The look on their faces when the judge dismissed their case with prejudice almost made all the headaches worthwhile. It was a crushing defeat, both legally and financially. Pursuing payments for their bloated legal fees bankrupted their extravagant lifestyles. Evelyn had to sell off her gaudy jewelry just to afford her clutching lawyers. Last I heard, she moved into some budget retirement village downstate, her fall from fortune now complete. As for Declan, criminal charges soon caught up with him for past shady dealings, finally severing his privileged safety net for good. He deserved worse, but knowing he languished in prison was consolation enough. Their poisonous presence finally vanished from my life, and more importantly from Dad's company. Still, caution lingered. Tom upgraded security measures and instituted new protocols to prevent any remaining insider threats. After avoiding catastrophe by a hair, no chances could be taken with protecting the brewery's future. With operations now safe, I focused energy into the workforce. Employees received expanded healthcare coverage and retirement matching. New family-friendly policies made the workplace more accessible. Dad built this company to sustain lives. Now more than ever, with Evelyn and Declan's toxicity gone, his vision deserved nurturing. Gazing around my office, memories swelled within me. The antique oak furniture, leather-bound books, and Mustang car models transporting me back to eager days as a boy, sitting at Dad's feet listening with wonder as he strategized ambitious plans for growth, back when we shared joy and possibility instead of pain and betrayal. Now at last I understood why he stood guard over this empire so protectively. It represented the best of his spirit and life's passion. Not just wood, brick, and steel buildings, housing stainless steel vats and bottling machinery, but the culmination of community and purpose he willed into existence from imaginings of a better future for all. A quiet knock interrupted my reminiscing. I glanced up as Tom stepped in. "The scholarship fund paperwork is ready for your review," he said. "Once you approve, we can announce it at the annual gala next month." I smiled broadly. Using a large portion of my inheritance, I established a memorial scholarship in Dad's name to fund the brewery education and training costs for underprivileged youth. By empowering eager minds from challenging backgrounds, the fund ensured Dad's legacy continued transforming lives for generations to come. "Sounds perfect," I said, scrawling my signature across the documents. "Let's make the announcement." Tom's eyes shone bright. As we left the office to oversee the bottling line, I sensed Dad walking beside us, grinning wide at what his life's work had grown into. The company remained now exactly as he envisioned, a force elevating our community through integrity and vision. By safeguarding its future from those who tried claiming it for greed's sake, the brewery and Dad's ideals would continue changing lives. His spirit thrived in every bottle produced, reminding me what truly matters. Not wealth or assets, but people and potential. Thank you, Dad, for showing me what legacy means. Yours will never be forgotten. You call that a real job? Vivian's shrill voice cut through the tense silence at the dinner table like a knife. I flinched, my fork clattering against the plate. My mother-in-law's beady eyes bored into me, her thin lips curled in disdain. Wasting your days playing around with colors and shapes on a computer. How avant-garde. Across the table, Eli kept his head down, avoiding my pleading gaze. I opened my mouth to respond, but Vivian barreled on, her voice dripping with contempt. I don't know why I even let you stay under my roof. At least Eli made an honest living with his finance job before. She trailed off, though the implication hung heavy in the air. Ever since Eli's unexpected layoff and our move into her home, Vivian had wasted no opportunity to demean my career as a freelance graphic designer. Mom, that's enough, Eli muttered, but lacked the conviction to meet her glare. Hot shame burned my cheeks as unwanted memories resurfaced. The endless job searches culminating in rejections for roles I was overqualified for. The forced smiles as I explained my unconventional career to friends and relatives, their skepticism thinly veiled. But this was a new low, having my passion, my art, denigrated as a silly indulgence within my own home, by my own family. I swallowed hard, my appetite extinguished. I may not bring in the income your precious Eli once did, but my work is still valid. I take pride in it. Vivian barked a humorless laugh. Pride? In scribbling doodles like a child? Her scornful gaze raked over me, cold with dismissal. I expected better for my son's wife. You're nothing but a disappointment, just like... The shrill ring of the kitchen timer mercifully cut her off. Vivian pushed back her chair with a huff. Well, I'd better check on those pies. We certainly can't have those getting overcooked, unlike some people's ambitions in this house. As she bustled away, an uneasy silence fell over the dining room. I caught Eli's eye, desperate for solidarity, for defense against his mother's relentless belittling. But he just gave a small shrug and dropped his gaze, polishing off his plate. The message was clear. He wouldn't risk crossing Vivian, not while we relied on her hospitality. Clenching my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms, I fought the hot sting of tears. Our situation was temporary, a difficult but necessary path to get back on our feet after Eli's job loss. At least that's what I'd told myself when we accepted Vivian's offer to move in. How long could we endure her toxic presence? I wondered, my dream career already withering under her disdain. As Vivian's barbed laughter echoed from the kitchen, a leaden knot formed in my chest. This was no home, it was a battlefield, and I was shaping up to be the first casualty. The following week, a new domestic routine took hold that made Vivian's true intentions abundantly clear. You'd better get started on those dishes, dear, she said in a sugary sweet tone after clearing the breakfast plates. And don't forget to wipe down the counters. We don't want any unsightly stains. I frowned at the rapidly growing pile in the sink, but dutifully began scrubbing away the remnants of Eli and Vivian's hearty country breakfast. Eggs, bacon, the works. My own meal had been a simple bowl of oatmeal, per Vivian's instructions. Can't have you packing on any unnecessary pounds, she had tittered, patting my arm in mock concern. Wouldn't want my Eli to regret his choice in wives now, would we? By the time I drained the sink, Vivian had already vanished to run her other endless errands and chores, leaving me alone to clean the kitchen to her exacting standards. The same went for the bathrooms, the laundry, dusting every nook and cranny until the house gleamed. You should be grateful I'm keeping you busy, she said when I dared to protest the relentless workload one evening, with your unconventional career situation. Her meaning was clear. By her reckoning, I was little more than a freeloader without my real job to occupy me. The chores were her way of justifying my presence under her roof. Eli did his part, at least, diligently searching and applying for any finance opening that matched his experience. But his disillusionment after being cast aside by his former employer was palpable. When he trudged home night after night, head bowed in defeat from another fruitless round of interviews, it was Vivian who offered comfort and pep talks. Her cloying reassurances that he had simply gotten unlucky slowly dissolved his self-confidence while driving a wedge between us. Poor Eli, she cooed, while I scrubbed furiously at a stubborn scorch mark on the stove. It must be so humiliating having to rely on his dear old mother while his wife contributes nothing to the household. Gritting my teeth, I refused to meet her sly, taunting gaze. I knew full well what her game was, isolating me, chipping away at my self-worth and marriage until I was made to feel like an utter burden. She had taken full advantage of our circumstances, wielding her temporary generosity like a vice to crack me from her son's life. Once shattered, he would have no choice but to turn fully to her for support and approval. The realization struck like a dousing of ice water. My own mother-in-law scheming against me with ruthless determination. How many of Eli's past relationships had crumbled under her manipulations? No more, I vowed silently, wringing the tattered dish rag between white-knuckled fists. Vivian wanted a war of attrition? She was going to get one. When Eli trudged in that evening, I met him at the door with a grim smile. "We need to talk, in private." His brow furrowed at my tone, but I was done playing Vivian's gamekeeper's prisoner. If she wanted to fight for her son's soul, I would match her fury with a cunning all my own. No more Mrs. Nice daughter-in-law. Over the next few weeks, Vivian's campaign of emotional sabotage kicked into high gear. Not a day went by without some snide remark or underhanded slight designed to reinforce my worthlessness. "Don't you ever get tired of staring at that computer screen all day, dear?" she sneered while I typed away at a logo commission one afternoon. So cosmically unfulfilling. I grit my teeth, refusing to rise to her bait. The client's deposit money was a lifeline in our strained financial situation, one Vivian constantly held over my head. "I'm just worried for your mental health, cooped up in here with no real purpose," she continued with a derisive cluck. "What kind of life is that for a bright young woman?" Thankfully, Eli was out pounding the pavement at another round of fruitless interviews. I wasn't eager to suffer Vivian's harangues with an audience. However, when a promising graphic design opportunity did arise requiring me to attend meetings, she was lying in wait. "You're not seriously considering leaving the house looking like that?" Vivian's shrill voice lashed out as I hurried down the hall, my nicest blouse and slacks neatly pressed. I pulled up short, fingers tightening around the portfolio case. "Meaning what exactly?" "Well, just look at you." She raked a critical gaze over my appearance. "Wrinkled, frumpy, with coin-sized bags under your eyes from hyperventilating over those silly doodles all night." Scalding humiliation burned my cheeks as her words struck home. Between the endless chores and desperate need to prove myself with design gigs, I admittedly hadn't paid much attention to my appearance beyond basic grooming. Vivian's bony arms crossed over her chest, lips pursed in exaggerated disgust. "Is that really the image you want to present to potential employers, dear? They'll smell your slobbery desperation from a mile away. Do us all a favor and spare yourself the embarrassment." The words sliced like a barbed whip, stealing my breath. I clutched the portfolio tighter, blinking back enraged tears as she savored her dominance. I knew playing into her manipulation was exactly what she wanted. But excavating the tattered remnants of my self-confidence proved futile against her relentless torrent of derision. In the end, I canceled the meeting and all future design inquiries, feigning some invented excuse about needing to prioritize the family. Vivian's shark-like smile that evening said it all. Another tendril of my identity brutally pruned in her crusade of subjugation. I was gradually being hollowed out from the inside, hollowed out from the vibrant, passionate woman Eli had fallen for. He remained oblivious, of course, lost in his own dejected fog of unemployment. The few times I tentatively aired my growing resentment of his mother, he just averted his gaze, murmuring some vague reassurance that she ultimately meant well. On the rare nights we connected intimately, I could sense his arousal waning along with his respect for me. Who was I becoming under Vivian's influence? Just another outmatched foe, cowed and depleted by her twisted convictions until only a shell remained? No, some faint flicker of defiance raged from deep within. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Vivian wanted a monster of her own making. She was about to get one. Jaw set, I holed away on the computer, scouring for any digital fingerprints that could expose Vivian's machinations to Eli and the rest of the family. The first counterattack was coming. If she thought she could grind my spirit into submission, she had drastically underestimated my resolve. It was time to go nuclear on the battlefield she created. No more games. No more hollow smiles, masking seething hatred. All-out martial war was about to commence under her very roof. For weeks, I scoured every corner of the house and internet for clues about Vivian's motivations, burning the midnight oil on the computer long after she'd gone to bed. I cross-referenced public records, newspaper archives, social media profiles, anything that could expose her twisted agenda. Finally, the pieces began to fall into place. Pages of printed evidence stared back at me, damning in its comprehensiveness. "Everything okay, dear?" Vivian's sugary voice sliced through my concentration. I quickly minimized the browser window as she poked her head into the cramped home office. "You've seemed so preoccupied lately." "Just working," I mumbled, avoiding her prying gaze. "Keeping myself busy with some design projects." "How industrious." Her bony fingers stroked my shoulder, feigning motherly concern. "But you know, obsessing over those little drawings won't undo the past." I tensed at her words, wondering if she was baiting me. "Like Eli's failed relationships before you." There it was, the barb I'd been anticipating, laced with carefully calculated venom. I slowly pivoted to face her. "What are you suggesting?" Vivian's cold eyes glinted with cruel amusement. "Come now, you're not that dull. Even you must have noticed the pattern emerging." She squeaked loudly, shaking her head in feigned disappointment. "A spate of bright young women in Eli's life, full of promise and prospects. Until gradually, they start drifting away, becoming unmotivated, unambitious, resentful even." My blood turned to ice as she laid out the sickening implications. "Those poor girls simply didn't have the mental fortitude to be part of our family, to take on the duties required of an Elliot matriarch. They broke under the strain, or was it something else that broke them?" Reflexively, I curled my hands into fists to mask their trembling. "If you're insinuating what I think you are, I'm simply connecting the dots, dear." Vivian clucked her tongue again, as if chastising a petulant child. "Face facts, you're following the same inescapable trajectory as the others. Your professional situation is merely a precipitating factor, not the root cause." Her skeletal finger wagged in my face as she savored dragging out the reveal. "I did what I had to in order to preserve my son's future prospects, to protect him from diminishing attachments that would only wither his potential." The words spilled out in a sickening rush, past relationships poisoned through steady emotional attrition, financial entrapment, isolation, relentless needling until the woman's self-worth splintered, all orchestrated by Vivian in a coldly premeditated campaign of subjugation. You monster!" I choked out, struggling not to retch. "How could you do that to Eli, to your own son?" "I did it for Eli," she snapped, that familiar flash of contempt hardening her features. "To spare him the heartbreak of making the wrong choice and resigning himself to mediocrity. A mother's love can be cruel at times, but at least I had his best interests at heart." Her serpentine tongue flicked out to moisten her pursed lips. "This time will be no different, I'm afraid. For his own good, you simply have to go." With a final vindicated smirk, Vivian slithered from the room, leaving me to absorb the full, monstrous truth alone. Gripping the computer desk to steady my shaking limbs, I could no longer deny the depravity unfolding in slow motion around me. My mother-in-law wasn't just a manipulative harpy. She was a calculated, silver-tongued sociopath, systematically undermining my identity to its very core. All in the name of keeping her claws firmly latched into Eli's soul, molding his destiny to fit her twisted, narrow convictions. Anyone who threatened that control was simply another target to be crushed and discarded. White-hot rage seared through my shock, tempering into grim determination. If Vivian thought she could cow me into submission like her past victims, she had sorely underestimated this particular adversary. With a trembling hand, I reopened the research files, pages of tawdry deceptions meticulously logged, her own smug digital fingerprints preserved in sickening detail. I wouldn't just confront this sadistic harridan. I would dismantle her respectable facade, blow by agonizing blow until nothing remained but the gnarled, bitter husk she truly was. The game was on. This time, Vivian was going to learn just what kind of monster she'd created. After Vivian's chilling confession, I knew I had to act fast before her toxic influence metastasized any further. Gathering up the incriminating evidence I'd compiled, I made a silent vow. One way or another, this torment would soon be over. The first step was recruiting an ally on the inside. While Eli remained disturbingly blind to his mother's machinations, his father Nathan had increasingly picked up on the strain she was inflicting. One evening, after another tension-filled family dinner, I caught him alone in the den while Vivian was preoccupied with dishes. "We need to talk," I murmured under my breath, gesturing for him to follow me into the hallway. Nathan's brow furrowed with concern, but he complied without a word. "I can't take much more of this," I confessed in a hoarse whisper once we were out of earshot. Vivian's muffled humming from the kitchen made the hair prickle on my neck. "You know what she's been doing to me, don't you?" Nathan's haggard expression made it clear the truth wasn't lost on him. With a reluctant sigh, he gave a solemn nod. "You're not the first to suffer her special attention. It's a miracle Eli and I have stayed sane all these years." My hands trembled as I clutched the file, forcing the words out in a ragged rush. "It's even worse than we thought. She confessed to sabotaging Eli's previous relationships on purpose. Everyone who got close to him, she was systematically destroying them out of some sick, twisted obligation." A muscle twitched in Nathan's weathered jaw as he absorbed my words. For a long moment, he could only stare at me in stunned silence. "I had my suspicions," he finally rasped, scrubbing a hand over his face. "But to have it confirmed like this—" He shook his head in a slow, mournful arc before squaring his shoulders with newfound resolution. "No more. This has gone on for far too long." Reaching out to grasp my arm, Nathan gave it a reassuring squeeze, his eyes boring into mine with surprising urgency. "You get yourself out of here, you hear? Get somewhere safe while I figure out how to deal with the old bat for good." "But Eli—" I started to protest. "Leave my son to me." He cut me off with gruff insistence. "He's been too deep in her trance for too damn long. I'll make him understand what kind of vile creature he's been defending." A tense silence stretched between us, punctuated by the faint clink of dishware from the kitchen. "Be ready to expose all this at the next family gathering," Nathan continued in a low rasp. "Air out all her skeletons for everyone to see. It's long past time they knew the truth about their matriarch." I could only nod, a surge of gratitude temporarily rendering me speechless. At last, I had an ally willing to stand up to Vivian's tyranny. For now, start making your escape plans. Get yourself sorted with a safe place to land. His brow furrowed as a new thought occurred to him. "And whatever you do, don't tip off that you're onto her schemes. The less she suspects, the better our advantage." My heart hammered as the magnitude of the situation crystallized. This was it. The endgame against Vivian's poisonous influence was finally being set into motion. Tucking the file securely under my arm, I gave a determined nod. Consider it done. No more skulking in the shadows, letting that wretched succubus grind me down piece by piece. A flicker of approval ghosted across Nathan's stern features. "Attaway. Remember, whatever bridges you have to burn on your way out, it'll be worth it. Just watch your back until it's time to strike." With a final grim nod of understanding, we separated, the first shots having been fired in the looming confrontation to dismantle Vivian's toxic dynasty once and for all. Steeling my nerves, I turned towards plotting out the footwork for my escape. The old crone wanted an adversary worthy of her cruelty. She was about to get her deepest, darkest wish. The next few weeks were an agonizing exercise in subterfuge as Nathan and I laid the groundwork for our offensive against Vivian, keeping my hatred simmering under icy control while she continued her insidious manipulations was a Herculean effort. "Dear, you're looking peaky," Vivian crooned with mock concern one afternoon, eyeing my taut expression over her teacup. "I do hope you're not letting stress over your career troubles get the better of you." My fingernails dug into my palms as I fought back the torrent of vile retorts. So smug, so utterly self-assured that her twisted convictions granted carte blanche to emotionally eviscerate anyone who crossed her path. Mercifully, the weekend of the biannual Elliott family reunion finally arrived, providing the perfect stage to execute our long-awaited strike. While Vivian preened about playing the dutiful hostess, I quietly assembled the comprehensive evidence files Nathan and I had compiled. "Everything's in place," Nathan murmured under his breath as we made final preparations. dozens of relatives began filtering into the spacious backyard, drawn by Vivian's empty promises of bonhomie. "You sure you're ready to go through with this?" I inhaled deeply, fueling my nerves against the coming onslaught. More than ready. It's long past time that wretched phony was unmasked for everybody to see. No more games, no more hollow facades of civility. This was about to get brutally, ruinously real. As the afternoon dragged on, I maintained a calculated poker face, watching Vivian flit from group to group with her signature plastic smile. The utter audacity of her public performance after admitting her monstrousness made my skin crawl. "If I could have everyone's attention," she finally called out in a saccharine lilt, waving a simpering hand for silence. "I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you all the Elliott family homestead and—" The droning of her false platitudes tuned out as I caught Nathan's terse nod beside me. Showtime. Striding forward with the file cradled against my chest, I shoved my way into the center of the patio, fixing Vivian with a look of undisguised revulsion. A startled hush washed over the gathering as all eyes turned toward us. "That's enough of your grotesque pantomime, you wretched soulless harpy," I spat, every pent-up syllable simmering with palpable venom. "We're all quite familiar with what a despicable, manipulative monster you truly are." Vivian's staged smile curdled into a look of apoplectic rage. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I shot back, unshakably coldly. "How dare you present this facade of genteel hospitality after all the lives you've mercilessly worked to unravel over the years?" With a deft hand, I cracked open the file and began coldly reciting the highlights from Vivian's documented trail of cruelty. The financial constraints, the cruel taunts, the systematic dismantling of her victim's sense of self-worth. A chorus of horrified gasps and muttering echoed around the patio as one ugly truth after another poured out. "You did this to me," I declared, glaring at her with undisguised loathing. "You did this to all those girls unlucky enough to catch your precious Eli's heart before me. Anything at all, to keep your son under your dominion like some sort of deranged, emotional succubus." The word hung heavy over the patio, weighted with grotesque implication. Vivian, to her credit, had descended into sputtering, incoherent rage. "Monstrous lies," she finally shrieked, stabbing a clawed finger in my direction. "Everything I've done has been to preserve the integrity of this family, to keep us from being polluted by grasping, unworthy leeches like this spiteful harridan." I leveled an icy glare, feeding off the horrified energy rippling through the gathered Elliots. "You can drop the martyr act now, Vivian. We have testament after testament thoroughly documenting your toxic, sociopathic crusade to undermine anyone foolish enough to love your son." I let the damning file drop at her feet in revulsion. "You're an emotional terrorist, plain and simple, and you've been exposed to everyone here for the festering, irredeemable cancer you are." Vivian visibly wilted under the weight of silent condemnation from the surrounding family. One by one, the circle tightened around her, driving the twisted matriarch into a corner like the rabid animal she was. "Get out!" A gruff, furious voice cut through the tension. Nathan, finally free from her web, stalked forward with unvarnished loathing twisting his features. "Get out of my house, you miserable succubus. Your reign of terror is over." In that moment, the indomitable Vivian Elliott shriveled into a pitiable, broken creature. The rank stench of her malignance finally laid bare for all to behold. Satisfaction sang through my veins as I turned to watch her slinking, shunned and disgraced out into the lonely night. My own personal demon had finally been exorcised, and the future, while still shrouded in lingering hurt, finally shone with a glimmer of hope for redemption at last. The days following Vivian's brutal exposure at the family reunion were a maelstrom of turmoil. The Elliott clan, so accustomed to putting on airs of unity and decorum, had been irrevocably fractured by the truth about their matriarch's depravity. Entire branches of the family tree followed Vivian into exile, stubbornly clinging to her perfidious lies out of misplaced loyalty or sheer inability to accept her monstrous actions. Sister turned against brother, cousin against cousin, as age-old allegiances combusted into acrimonious infighting. Through it all, a hollow-eyed Eli could only watch in numb disbelief as the bedrock of his existence crumbled to ruin. For so long, he had been under his mother's diabolic spell. his sense of identity and priorities hopelessly warped to serve her pathological needs. I never truly saw her for what she was," he murmured one evening in a voice leached of all emotion. "How could I have been so blind?" We sat together on the back patio steps, the chilly night air lending a funereal pall. I reached over, clasping his hand in silent solidarity. "Your devotion as a son isn't something to censure yourself over," I said softly. "Vivian's skill as a master manipulator is what blinded you to her true nature for so long." Eli dragged in a ragged breath, squeezing his eyes shut as memories undoubtedly flooded back. The endless criticisms, the insidious needling against every relationship, that relentless push to surrender his individuality. "She really did think she was protecting me, didn't she?" he said at last, anguish clouding his features. "In that sick, twisted way of hers, she deluded herself into believing I needed her. Tough love to grow into the man she envisioned." My throat tightened at the naked vulnerability in his voice. For years, Vivian had stripped away his sense of self-worth and autonomy, leaving behind an emotional husk devoid of anything but codependent obedience to her narcissistic whims. "I'm so sorry, Eli," I whispered, feeling the sting of tears, "for not seeing it sooner, for ever letting her get her claws into us like that." His answering look was harrowed but clear. "Don't apologize, not for a second. She's the one who has to live with being a goddamn monster." A terse nod punctuated his words. For the first time I could remember, Eli carried the spark of unflinching resolution in his gaze. The spell was broken, Vivian's influence reduced to so much wasteful toxin being finally purged. Perhaps sensing this pivotal shift, Nathan quietly emerged onto the patio, a haggard older man suddenly freed of decades of emotional shackles. He moved to stand beside us in solemn solidarity. "So it's done then," he murmured in a gravelly tone. "The Dowager demon has been cast into the pit at long last." Eli gave a hollow nod, squeezing my hand tighter as Nathan settled onto the step beside us with bone-weary resignation. "It will take some recalibrating," he continued somberly. "For all of us, but most of all you, son. She didn't just undermine your partners, she systematically stripped you of any sense of self beyond her ambitions. Rebuilding that identity, overcoming those conditioned insecurities, it'll be a daily battle for a while yet." Silence hung heavy between them as the weight of Vivian's psychic toll sank in. So much damage inflicted, so much work ahead to heal the grievous, indelible scars. But her reign of terror was finally, mercifully over. "We'll get through it," I vowed resolutely, clutching Eli's hand with renewed determination. "Both of us, together this time. That cancerous influence is gone for good." A flicker of gratitude warmed Nathan's gruff features as he regarded me. "I have no doubt you will. A burden's been lifted we didn't even realize we were carrying all these years." Rising to his feet with an inscrutable glance towards the house's flickering lights, he cleared his throat. "Whenever you two are ready to start fresh, well, you've got a hell of a lot of personal healing ahead, but at least that path is clear now." Summoning a rueful chuckle, he briefly rested a hand on Eli's shoulder as he moved to retreat back inside. "Take all the time you need, son. That twisted karma has finally unwound, now it's just a matter of finding which path leads away from its ruins." The night breeze whispered across the yard, carrying whispers of possibility for the reclaimed future suddenly laid bare before us. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself a tentative breath of hope. Vivian was gone, exorcised. Now the true revival could finally begin. The months following our escape from Vivian's toxic web were an arduous journey of healing and rediscovery. Eli, in particular, fought to remake his sense of identity, to untangle decades of conditioning that had molded him into a hopelessly codependent extension of his mother's malignant narcissism. There were setbacks, of course, nights when the old insecurities would flare up, driving him into brooding funks until I managed to coax him back from that familiar abyss of self-doubt. Her spectral influence lingered like a cancerous remnant, poisoning his confidence at the most inopportune times. But we persevered, leaning on one another through the darkness. I refused to let Vivian's legacy consume us, no matter how viciously and stubbornly it clung to the roots of our relationship. Soon enough, my own artistic passions reignited in the wake of that toxic drought. Commissions and graphic design gigs steadily poured in, each completed piece chipping away at the rubble that Hag had strewn across my self-worth. "You're really starting to hit your stride," Eli murmured one evening, studying my latest logo mock-up with a contemplative gaze. "This work, it's undeniably brilliant, Marla. No vile opinions can refute that truth anymore." The unveiled sincerity in his voice washed over me like a soothing balm for the old, barely healed wounds. Gone was the meek, beaten-down husk of a man who had meekly abdicated his identity to Vivian's depraved whims. This Eli was revitalized, newly confident in voicing his convictions, without the looming fear of displeasing his manipulative parent. Free to be his own person at long last. Even Nathan, cordoned off in his separate home across town, exhibited remarkable strides in shaking off Vivian's corrosive influence. Some evenings he would stop by unannounced, hell-bent on reconnecting through the simple joys of family he had been deprived of for decades. "So this is what an Elliott matriarch should truly be," he rumbled approvingly as I dished up plates of homemade chicken parmesan, his first taste of my cooking in years. One whose passion centers around bringing people together rather than, well, you know. Eli and I exchanged a loaded look, both of us intimately aware of just what kind of matriarch Vivian had been, the kind whose legacy we were both still working to extract from our psyches. "It's a work in progress," I said with a tight smile. "But that's a good problem to have, building something nurturing out of the rubble she left behind." "Amen to that," Nathan replied gruffly, tucking into his meal with gusto. Occasionally he would grunt an appreciative nod between hefty bites, as if committing every tender, zesty forkful to memory. Simple family moments like this were no longer to be taken for granted, not after Vivian had deprived the Elliott clan of genuine intimacy and trust for far too long. Over time, Eli's professional life also righted itself in Vivian's absence. A promising financial advising position opened up, and to my immense pride, he attacked the opportunity with a boldness and dynamism that had been sorely lacking under his mother's oppression. "They'd be damned fools not to scoop you up immediately," I murmured as he prepped for the final round of interviews in his characteristic tailored suit. "Vivian's poison is expunged. Now they'll get to see you exactly for who you are." He grinned, that old self-assured charisma rekindled in his eyes as he reached over to squeeze my hands. "And who, pray tell, is that?" he asked with an arched brow. "A strong, ethical man who won't neglect his convictions or family," I shot back, matching his rakish look. "The kind of person I should have been able to see all those years ago, before that decrepit succubus warped your identity beyond recognition." His grin widened into an expression of unvarnished joy and love, the old scars finally mended enough to let happiness pour forth undeterred. Leaning in, he claimed my lips in a fiery, passionate embrace, one sealed after years of toxicity, despair, and harrowing conflict. We had both been forged anew from the smelter of Vivian's cruelty. Hardened, certainly, but undeterred in our quest to neutralize her lingering influences once and for all. When Eli landed the position a week later, we celebrated with a toast not just to his achievement, but to our collective rise from the ashes of that miserable psychopath's machinations. A new life, a new world of opportunity beckoned, one finally free from the crushing weight of that demented matriarch's control. The morning saga ended with Eli and I arm in arm at one of my own gallery openings nearly a year later, beatifically expectant with our first child as the ultimate repudiation of Vivian's derangement. Around us, a teeming crowd of colleagues, friends, and family congregated to celebrate my ascendant artistic achievements, solemnly reveling in the hard-won victories we had each carved from the rubble of past trauma. In that electrifying moment of validation and renewal, Vivian Elliott's malignancy was finally, conclusively extinguished by the twin fires of perseverance and love. She would always be a part of our shared histories. That much was undeniable. But her defeat and our dogged efforts to emerge unbowed from her cruelty's cauldron ensured that the last echoing remnants of that toxic matriarch's depravity had been forever exorcised. The Elliott's healing could truly begin at last. "How could he do this to us?" I muttered under my breath, bile rising in my throat as I took in the sight before me. My loving husband of 15 years, John, was strolling through the amusement park, his arm wrapped around the waist of a tall blonde. Laughing alongside them was a young boy around 6 or 7, gleefully clutching a stuffed animal prize. I grabbed Lily's hand, my fingers trembling. "Lily, honey," I choked out. "Let's go on the carousel, okay?" I steered my confused daughter away from the painful scene, barely holding myself together. Just hours earlier, John had kissed Lily on the cheek and wished her a happy birthday before rushing off for an emergency client meeting. And here he was, breaking promise after promise. I helped Lily onto a painted horse before settling onto my own with a deep exhale, struggling to gather my swirling thoughts. John and I had been college sweethearts, two idealistic kids ready to take on the world, mooning over dreams of a perfect family someday. After graduation, through lean times and multiple job switches, we had built a good life together. Or so I believed. We both worked hard, John as a marketing director and me a freelance CPA, hustling to pay the bills and save for Lily's future while still finding little moments of joy together as family. Sure, money had been tighter since I stepped back on work to care for Lily, and our date nights weren't as frequent anymore amid our tiring routines. But I thought our relationship was rooted in devotion and trust. I even overlooked John's recent distractedness as work stress. Oh, how wrong I was, that sneaking bastard! I glanced over at Lily, who was happily oblivious, giggling away on her carousel horse, my heart squeezed with anger at John's careless selfishness. By running off with some tramp, he was also abandoning his daughter on her 10th birthday. As we walked around after the ride, I slipped into numb autopilot, not trusting myself to hold it together if I dwelled any more on John's betrayal. I had to put on a brave smile for Lily's sake on her special day. We played carnival games, snacked on cotton candy, and laughed on the roller coasters. With each passing moment, though, I struggled to bury the simmering hurt and fury. Finally, as we exited yet another ride, Lily turned to me with questioning eyes. "Mom, it's been really fun today, but I kinda thought Dad would be here too." She trailed off uncertainly. "Is he going to come later for the fireworks?" The hope shining through my little girl's face unleashed a floodgate of long-suppressed emotions. I couldn't hold back the burning tears anymore. "Oh, sweetheart," I wrapped Lily in a fierce, protective hug as sobs racked my body. She deserved to know the truth. I swiped at my running mascara and met her alarmed eyes. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I saw your dad here earlier. He was with another lady and boy." I watched Lily closely for her reaction. Confusion clouded her features. "What do you mean with them?" she asked hesitantly. I took a deep breath before continuing gently. "Honey, he had his arm around that woman, like he does with me sometimes, and he was playing with the boy too, winning him prizes." Lily's face fell as understanding dawned. "You mean, like a date? But dads don't go on dates with other moms. Does this mean he doesn't want to spend time with us anymore?" My heart cracked hearing the tremor in her small voice. I squared my shoulders, steeling my resolve right then. John may have betrayed me as a partner, but I would not let him hurt my little girl so callously. "Oh, Lily, I honestly don't know why your dad did this, but no matter what, we have each other. I'll always be here for you, okay?" I squeezed her hand supportively. Lily rushed into my arms again, hugging me tightly. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. Those 4 words were like a soothing balm, nourishing my soul and strengthening my conviction to shield Lily from further heartache in whatever ways necessary. As I held my brave daughter close, staring out at the colorful horizon, I sensed a new chapter dawning. No more blind trust without verification when it came to John. For Lily's well-being, I would get to the bottom of his shady behavior. If he thought he could just walk all over us while I dutifully covered for him, he had another thing coming. For now, I had a little girl's birthday magic to preserve at all costs. But soon enough, John would have to own up. Justice would be served one way or another. After all, this was just Act 1, and the real fireworks were yet to come. Over the next few weeks, I struggled to act normal whenever John was around. I didn't dare confront him yet without concrete proof of his betrayal. So I swallowed the acid words on the tip of my tongue each time he casually pecked my check after returning home late from another business meeting. The gnawing pit in my stomach grew more cavernous with each of his transparent lies. My raging suspicions were all but confirmed when I overheard John murmuring affectionately into his phone one night after he assumed I was asleep. I crept closer to the home office door and pressed my ear against it. "I missed you too, Jess," John chuckled softly. "Yesterday was so much fun. I can't stop thinking about our time together." Jess. Short for Jessica, perhaps? So the backstabbing weasel was on a first-name basis with his floozy girlfriend. I dug my nails into my clammy palms, struggling to restrain my disgust. John continued reminiscing in hushed tones about some resort getaway filled with cozy dinners and stolen kisses. My lungs constricted, bile rising in my throat. So, while John claimed to be on work trips, he was actually wining and dining his mistress at fancy hotels. I couldn't stomach hearing another word. I retreated back to our bedroom on unsteady feet, my earlier suspicion hardening into cold, hard fury. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at school before driving over to John's office. I simply had to clear the air once and for all. Surely there was an innocent misunderstanding. My loyal husband of 15 years would never actually cheat on me. With every mile, I desperately tried convincing myself of this alternate rosy reality. But when I stepped through the polished doors, my last hopes were dashed. "Why, yes, John Mitchell just left for Memphis," his startled secretary Evelyn confirmed. "He'll be meeting clients there before returning next Tuesday." Memphis, not the Jersey headquarters he had specifically mentioned to me in passing over breakfast. Throat constricting, I turned on my heels and fled to the safety of my vehicle before Evelyn could glimpse the hot tears of frustration stinging my eyes. Resting my head warily against the steering wheel, my last illusions withered away. My husband was indeed having an affair behind my back. Over the next week, my state of mind deteriorated into a foggy mess of anxiety and sorrow. I continued probing for the elusive truth, despite already knowing it deep down. When John didn't return on the expected Tuesday, instead extending his trip another 4 days, I hit my breaking point. As I tidied his drawers while sorting laundry, a flowery perfume wafted out that I didn't recognize. Underneath the folds, a lace negligee of a much smaller size than my own laid provocatively. That did it. All restraint evaporated instantly like steam. Snatching my purse with trembling hands while fighting angry tears, I convinced our next-door neighbor Jane to watch Lily for the night. Before I lost my nerve, I hopped into an Uber bound for the seedier side of town. It was time for drastic measures. I hesitated only briefly outside room 17B as the muffled sounds of ecstasy leaked under the door. Then, steeling my shaking bones, I boldly pushed inside. The exhibition of twisting limbs and tangled sheets burned my eyes, but I forced myself to keep watching through narrowed slits. No backing down now. I needed to see my cheating scumbag husband in all his whoring glory to file for the strongest divorce case possible. To think I had wasted years of loyalty and intimacy on this spineless loser humping the mattress without a care in the world. As they both erupted into climax, I whipped out my smartphone to capture the money shot. Click, click, click. Undisputable proof of adultery. No denying it now with this lurid footage in hand. "What the hell?" John shouted as the naked woman under him, likely Jessica, let loose an ear-piercing shriek. Their interlocked body parts scrambled to hide under the rumpled covers, but I had already seen enough. More than enough for multiple lifetimes, unfortunately. I smirked vindictively, pocketing my smoking gun evidence as the color drained from John's stubbled features. He began sputtering. "Susan, I can exp," but I slammed the door mid-sentence. Time to finally bust this pathetic cheater with the power of truth. My fulminating heart nearly rejoiced, picturing the fallout headed his way. The amusement park stretched before us in all its frenetic glory, a whirling kaleidoscope of colors under the bright summer sun. I squeezed Lily's hand tightly, hoping to infuse some of my nervous energy into her smaller frame. As we walked through the cheering crowds, nausea churned my otherwise empty stomach. This was it, the confrontation I had obsessed over planning since that sordid night at the hotel. When I stumbled upon John canoodling his busty mistress mid-thrust, I knew my decade-long marriage was finished. Once Lily turned 18, there would be nothing binding me to that cheating scumbag any longer. But I couldn't let my sweet Lily go on believing in her father's devotion any longer either. She had moped for days when John missed her chorus recital to extend his work trip. Meanwhile, that two-timing bastard was likely wining and dining Jessica at some five-star restaurant without a care in the world. An acidic fury licked my veins, imagining Lily continuing to pine for her father's affection that would never come. No, it was time she witnessed exactly what John prioritized over family. I would finally expose his true duplicitous colors. As we meandered through the park, scanning the swelling crowds, my heart pounded a frantic staccato beat. Where was that rat? Lily prattled on excitedly about rides, but her voice faded to background static against the rushing blood in my ears. And then suddenly, I spotted him. Talking to a caramel-haired woman by the funnel cake stand, his beefy arm draped possessively around her waist. At their feet stood a young boy with a thatch of chestnut hair, likely no older than 7. He was eagerly stuffing his face with confetti-dusted fried dough, getting sugar all over his round cheeks. My fists involuntarily clenched, and I nudged Lily gently. "See that man over there in the red shirt, sweetie?" I softly murmured against her hair. As she glanced over, her eyes doubled in size. "Daddy?" Lily screeched in disbelief. "Who is that lady with him and the little boy?" She whipped her head back and forth between me and John frantically as realization sunk in. Meanwhile, John had heard Lily's cry, his cocky grin melting like hot wax. His arm dropped from Jessica's waist as they spun to face us. I stalked closer, keeping a firm grip on Lily's clammy palm. Halting an arm's length away, I fixed my estranged husband with a blistering glare that could melt steel. "Well, isn't this quite the father-son outing, John?" I spat, vitriol coating each syllable. "Or maybe this blonde bombshell is just your new mommy replacement for when I kick you to the curb." John paled further as a sheen of sweat beaded his pasty skin. "Susan, let me explain," he choked out weakly. I cut off his pathetic sputtering with a disgusted snort as Jessica stared fixedly at the ground. "Save your smarmy excuses. Nothing justifies abandoning your wife and daughter to play house with this home-wrecking bimbo." I growled savagely. Meanwhile, poor Lily looked utterly lost and crestfallen as her fantasy father figure withered before her eyes. Seeing those fat alligator tears shimmering along her lashes fueled my raging inferno even hotter. "Is this why you are always too busy with work to spend time with me, Daddy?" Lily finally croaked out. John's shoulders slumped further as shame painted his features. He reached towards our daughter pleadingly, but she instantly recoiled several steps. "Bug, it's complicated. I never meant to hurt you or Mommy." I quickly intervened before he could poison Lily's mind with more deception. Having my innocent child comforting this cheating trash was unacceptable. Snatching Lily close before she could absorb more trauma, I addressed John with blistering contempt. "You sniveling coward are hereby cut off from our lives. I wasted too many years blinded by your lies already. Let's go, Lily." Keeping my head high, I steered us swiftly towards the park exit without another backwards glance. As we retreated from the battlegrounds, a bittersweet sensation flooded my frayed nerves. I had shielded Lily from further manipulation and uncover the ugly truth as promised. She would undoubtedly have many confusing emotions to process in the coming days. But moving forward, we could rebuild our lives free of John's contaminating presence. What lay ahead might seem uncertain, but embracing this new destiny solo could only lead to bigger and better things. I awoke with a jolt, instantly oriented to my unfamiliar surroundings. The floral wallpaper and lacy curtains were a far cry from my bedroom's simple blue hues. Then the events of the previous night came thundering back. That disastrous confrontation at the amusement park, which ended with John pathetically begging on his knees, a snotty mess of tears and excuses. Jessica and her son had already scurried off by then, not daring to meet my incensed glare. The raging aftermath was truly a sight to behold, apparently, with crowds of spectators gawking. After threatening John with a restraining order if he dared show his despicable face again, I hurried a shell-shocked Lily back home to safety. We collapsed into bed early, emotionally drained from the day's dramatic unraveling. Now, as morning light bathed the cozy cottage interior, I heard a soft rap at the bedroom door. I opened it to find Lily's petite frame swimming in an oversized t-shirt, her blonde curls a tangled bedhead. Wordlessly, I pulled my baby girl close, cocooning her in my warmth. We soon headed downstairs, lured by the delicious scent of Alice's famous blueberry pancakes. My college roommate had graciously offered her seaside vacation home when she heard of my impending separation. "You and Lily take however long you need," Alice urged last night over the phone. "Frank and I rarely use the Cape May place anyway." So this would be our safe haven until the divorce dust settled and I figured out longer-term housing. John may have shattered my rosy dreams, but I refused to crumble. I had a child relying on me. After enjoying Alice's fluffy stacks drowned in maple and some much-needed girl talk, Lily wandered outside to explore the beach. Gazing after her through the large kitchen windows, I let out a heavy sigh. My poor daughter didn't deserve any of this ugliness and betrayal after already losing her mother so young. At that moment, my cell vibrated loudly against the granite countertops. I glanced down to see John's goofy contact photo flashing insistently. Speak of the devil himself. Swiping angrily, I answered the call. Might as well rip the Band-Aid off fully regarding where things stood. "Susan." John's voice crackled desperately through the speakers. "Thank God you answered. Please don't hang up." Rolling my eyes in disgust, I growled, "You have 2 minutes, John. Make it quick." "I just wanted to explain everything. This whole mess with Jessica just got out of hand." He rushed on, not bothering to hide the desperation in his tone. "Please, I'll do anything. Counseling, quit my job, just don't leave." "Are you quite finished?" I snapped sharply. "Why should I believe anything spewing from your lying mouth? Does our decade together mean so little that you'd throw it away for some cheap trollop?" "No, I swear she meant nothing," John sputtered. "It was only a stupid fling. I was selfish and weak. But I want to fix us. Please, Susan, I'm begging you. Think of our family." His words ignited a white-hot fury. I briefly imagined marching over to throttle some sense into that thick, stupid skull. "How dare you appeal to family values after sneaking around behind our backs for who knows how long?" "I saw the text messages and racy lingerie, John," I snarled. "Man up and take accountability for once. Consider this your final notice that I'm filing for divorce." I relished hitting the red end button on his sputtering excuses, feeling fully empowered by my conviction. The rose-tinted glasses had shattered fully, leaving no doubt remaining. Loyalty meant nothing to someone who could lie through their teeth so easily to my face all this time. Well, no more. I refused to waste another minute questioning my worth because of his moral failing. A new life awaited where Lily and I could thrive happily without John's toxicity. My attorney had already been contacted to proceed with the separation filing. Today marked the first strides towards an abuse-free future. Heading back outside into the salty ocean breeze, I joined my daughter constructing sandcastles, the horizon filled with nothing but boundless possibility. I tapped my foot impatiently against the worn linoleum, assaulting the last cold dregs of my coffee. Where was he? John better not stand me up again and leave me waiting here like an idiot. Not after explicitly requesting to meet one last time for closure. Mercifully, the nondescript diner door chimed open then. I spotted John shuffling towards my corner booth, appearing almost timid. Once seated across from me, though, his earlier contrition evaporated instantly. Leaning back against cracked red vinyl, John crossed his arms defiantly. "All right, let's talk. But before you go making any rash decisions, Susan, hear me out. I want shared custody of Lily." I choked on my own saliva. "Excuse me, you must be out of your mind," I countered through wheezing breaths. John barreled on aggressively. "That adorable little girl deserves a father figure in her life. You honestly want to rob Lily of that joy? And disrupt her sense of normalcy even more?" His beady eyes glinted with cunning determination. My fingernails carved half-moon indentations into my sweaty palms under the table. This manipulative snake thought he still could dictate terms? "You lost any paternal privileges cheating on our family, John," I seethed quietly. "Lily requires way more care and attention than you ever provided her anyway." "Oh, please," John snorted derisively. "I may have screwed up recently, but don't pretend it was all rainbows and sunshine before. With you off pampering high-end clients at all hours, poor Lily barely saw either of us most days." His accusations ignited my simmering rage into a full rolling boil. I fought the almost uncontrollable urge to lunge across the table and throttle John's thick neck. "How dare you pin your neglect on my workload?" I spat contemptuously instead. At least those clients guaranteed Lily's school funds, clothes, extracurriculars over the years, things she always had to beg her deadbeat father for. John at least had the decency to appear abashed, picking at non-existent lint. After a charged beat, he mumbled weakly, "Jessica, she made me feel alive again, like before we became bogged down with so many responsibilities." Lifting his eyes beseechingly to meet my stony gaze, he implored, "Can't we just try counseling, Susan? I can't lose you both." I surveyed John's aging visage critically, the wrinkles etching hard lines, bald patch spreading, and paunch steadily expanding. Was this really the same man I fell for years ago when his sculpted arms could effortlessly lift me against his firm chest? That John was long gone, apparently, replaced by this shallow, selfish imposter twiddling his thumbs across from me. I exhaled slowly, feeling the fight seep away. "No, John, too much damage is done. I saw the real you that night, your complete apathy at destroying Lily's innocence and trust. As her mother, I refuse to let you keep poisoning her mind and self-worth." Pushing up from the table, I leaned across and fixed John with an icy glare. "Consider this your final notice. If I see you anywhere near me or Lily again, I won't hesitate getting a restraining order." John lunged forward to grab my wrist pleadingly. "Please, Susan, be reasonable. We can still fix this. I need you both." Wrenching my hand back forcefully, I tossed a crumpled 20 on the table that would easily cover both our untouched meals. John called after me desperately, but I didn't pause, pushing into bright daylight and taking a deep restorative gulp. The fresh outdoor air filled my lung with newfound clarity. I felt fully unburdened from my past illusions. John refusing accountability cemented I made the right call, kicking him to the curb for good. Settling behind my steering wheel, resolve coursed through me stronger than ever. I would inform my lawyer about John's delusional custody demands immediately to get that scum out of our lives quicker. The court would take one look at his sloppy appearance today, bloodshot eyes, tousled hair, mismatched shoes, and declare him an unfit parent easily. Peeling out onto the open road ahead, I cranked up the radio defiantly. 2 middle fingers saluted the shrinking diner behind me. John wanted a cutthroat legal battle? Oh, he would sorely regret awakening this mama bear's wrath. Deep breaths, Lily, sweetheart. We're in this together, okay? I squeezed my daughter's hand reassuringly as we exited the idling Uber. The courthouse facade towered over us, seeming to mock my frayed nerves. After months of exhausting paperwork, financial untangling, and legal maneuvering, we had finally arrived on Judgment Day. I prayed the Honorable Judge Dalton presiding over the proceedings today saw facts for what they were, that John was a lying, cheating scumbag undeserving of time with my precious daughter. As we navigated towards the assigned courtroom, a familiar grating voice accosted us from behind. "There are my 2 favorite girls." Spinning on my kitten heels, I came face to face with the devil himself. John, in his grubby flesh and slightly disheveled suit, grinning like the moron he was. I quickly stepped in front of Lily, blocking his path. She peeked around my frame warily as I crossed my arms forbiddingly. "Don't come any closer, John. We have nothing left to discuss." His greasy smile remained pasted in place. "Susan, please, we shouldn't fight anymore. It's not good for Lily," he implored with faux sincerity. "I just want to be a family again." "Liar!" Lily suddenly shouted, face scrunching angrily as she dodged under my arm. "If you cared about me, you wouldn't have left us for that blonde witch." I gently tugged Lily back as she vented loudly. While immensely satisfied at my typically soft-spoken daughter finding her voice, I didn't need John's dramatics jeopardizing our case. Sure enough, he instantly switched tactics, amping up the waterworks for arriving spectators. "Lillian, how can you say that? You know you're Daddy's special girl. I never meant to hurt anyone. Please, just come give me a hug." He stretched his meaty arms towards Lily beseechingly. I quickly intervened, shoving his grabby paws back forcefully. Through gritted teeth I seethed, "Save your sniveling act, John. You lost any shot playing father months ago." Propelling Lily forward, I called over my shoulder, "Let the courts finally set you straight." Settling into the creaky wooden benches with Lily tucked protectively under my arm, I steadied my nerves with deep breaths. We could do this. Justice would be served. I stroked Lily's baby fine hair soothingly as we awaited kickoff. Right on cue, an authoritative voice bellowed, "Mitchell versus Mitchell, presiding Judge Dalton." We approached the podium as John did the same, keeping my expression schooled neutral. What followed next was a tedious hour rehashing the same tired arguments from our mediation session. John begged for leniency as an imperfect human, while I calmly recapped his endless lies and manipulation. Finally, Judge Dalton, an austere woman with spectacles perched severely on her nose, intervened. "Enough, Mr. Mitchell. While your transgressions alone don't necessarily forfeit custody rights, Mrs. Mitchell makes valid claims to your parental unsuitability." John instantly reddened, opening his mouth for rebuttal, but the judge steamrolled on. "There are concerning patterns here: missed school events, financial negligence regarding child support, empty promises that understandably eroded the mother-daughter trust." My heart swelled, hearing Judge Dalton finally hold John accountable. Justice was being served. "Therefore, I hereby grant Mrs. Mitchell full physical and legal custody of Lillian Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell will be restricted to supervised monthly visits pending evaluation of sustained behavioral changes." She banged her gavel decisively. "Court adjourned." The celebratory leap from our bench jostled several loose papers, but I didn't care one iota about decorum in that spectacular moment. Laughing joyously, I twirled a similarly elated Lily in gleeful circles. Nearby, John stood motionless, ashen-faced, as the bailiff approached to escort him out, while rattling off next steps for scheduling visit supervisor meetings. But suddenly, John shrugged off the restraint, charging towards us wildly. "You heartless bitch!" he roared, spittle flying. "You can't steal my daughter away!" Security lunged to apprehend John's bulk as he thrashed violently like a rabid animal, his blistering gaze promising unfinished business even while being dragged away in handcuffs. I instinctively clutched Lily tighter to shield her from the horrifying outburst. But as John disappeared from view, I slowly exhaled the lingering tension. We had endured the worst already. The legal system would protect us from here on out. Today commemorated much-awaited closure and the dawn of a hopeful new chapter. I tapped my heels impatiently against scuffed linoleum, assaulting the last cold dregs of my coffee. The airport lounge television was tuned to some mindless mid-morning talk show, volume muted. Where was that blasted connection flight from Houston? Lily craned her neck expectantly beside me. We had been awaiting my parents' arrival for over 6 hours now after unexpected weather delays along their journey from Florida. Their impending first visit since my divorce, finalized last month, carried special meaning. Mother would certainly dissect every detail of the legal battle and aftermath, offering her signature unfiltered feedback. While normally exhausting, I knew her unique perspective might provide needed closure. My phone suddenly dinged with an incoming news alert. I skimmed the notification headline casually, before instantly doing a double take as the words registered fully. Biz exec John Mitchell's affair, outburst go viral, career in tailspin. Heart racing, I urgently tapped the link for more details as Lily peered over my shoulder curiously. The damning article that loaded was accompanied by the very courthouse steps photo capturing John's crazed eruption towards Lily and I weeks earlier. So that's what had been the mysterious incident. Vague whispers alluded to around John's abrupt departure from the company. I scrolled hungrily, the scandalous details sating my nosy appetite. Apparently, the amateur courthouse footage had spread rapidly across social media last month. Once John's identity was leaked by tipsters, all hell broke loose. The very workplace that once celebrated John's swaggering bravado apparently couldn't distance themselves fast enough from the wife-abandoning, tantrum-throwing villain caught on tape. Once the social media wagons circled to dig up more dirt, local press had begun circling like vultures. John's 19-year-old mistress, Jessica Stanforth's Instagram influencer aspirations provided tabloid fodder and tanked overnight. Brazen poolside selfies vanished instantly when the dotting dad community realized they had been funding her lusty lifestyle all along. John himself became persona non grata overnight, both personally and professionally. The article cited inside sources, claiming his employer received endless complaints demanding the snake's firing. Rather than withstand the judgmental scrutiny, John had apparently negotiated a hasty exit, collecting only a fraction of his remaining contract dues. I leaned back against the plastic seat with undisguised relish. So Johnny Boy was finally reaping some bitter karma after decades believing money and status placed him above common decency? couldn't have happened to a more deserving jackass. Just then, the garbled intercom announced the next flight's long-awaited arrival. As Lily and I eagerly gathered our carry-ons, I made a mental note to clip this exposé for Mother's take later over dinner. She always did relish a salacious takedown of toxic men abusing power. After hasty introductions with the driver holding our name sign, we headed towards baggage claim. I was just pointing out the empty carousel to activate when suddenly a familiar gruff voice bellowed out. "There's my gorgeous girl." Lily's delighted squeal was soon muffled against my stepdad Dave's broad chest as he enfolded her in his signature bear hug. I quickly found myself swept up too against Dave's lumberjack frame alongside Mom's waifish one. As I soaked up the familial affection like a sponge, tears pricked unexpectedly. In my crusade against John's villainy, I had nearly forgotten the power of true unconditional love staring right at me. On the drive over, with Lily chattering happily from her perch between my parents, I gazed out at the sun-speckled skyscrapers buzzing by outside. The future shimmered with possibility now that dead weight had been shed fully. Mom reached over to pat my hand gently, compassion shining from her still youthful features. In her crinkled eyes, I glimpsed the promise of more laughter than tears in this new chapter unfolding. Leaning back against the plush leather, I let the metaphorical dust settle completely. John's downfall was merely collateral damage amid more profound lessons recently carved painfully but necessarily. Prizing truth and loyalty in all facets of life here on out would steer me right, and my daughter would thrive with fierce feminine role models lighting the way forward. "Ooh, where should we hang this one, sweet pea?" I smiled down at Lily, who was frowning at the newly printed photo in concentration, tongue sticking out adorably. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains in our bare-walled apartment, the fresh start still needing personalization. Maybe next to your accounting certificate, Mommy. Since it's another thing to be really proud of," Lily finally declared decisively. I chuckled and squeezed her shoulders affectionately at the sentiment before moving to hammer the professional portrait of myself in a sleek blazer into place. Stepping back, I surveyed our progress with swelling satisfaction. The chaotic last few months of legally severing from John, finding an affordable apartment, enrolling Lily in a new school, and relaunching my CPA business had certainly stretched me thin. But with my parents' short-term help settling things and providing free childcare, the worst was behind us. I still grappled occasionally with twinges of self-blame for uprooting Lily's stability, but so far she was adjusting admirably to her new bedroom and school community. And with each personalized fixture we assembled, her canopy bed, customized desk area, art collection, I witnessed our little nest become a sanctuary emitting hints of joyful life again. The strident ring of my cell phone interrupted our interior design planning then. I glanced down to see an unknown Denver number flashing insistently. Brow furrowing, I answered cautiously. Likely just another tedious robocall, I assumed, but instead, a hesitant female voice instead asked, am I speaking with Susan Mitchell? Susan Hayes? I stiffened warily. Who was this, and how had they tracked down my cell or new legal name change? Speaking, and you are? I prompted crisply when she didn't immediately elaborate. Oh, terribly sorry. I should have introduced myself first. I'm Martha Reed. I was hoping we could talk. She rushed on breathlessly as I struggled placing the unfamiliar name. Again, you have me at a loss here, Ms. Reed, I countered bluntly, instinctually protective against unsolicited intrusions after the media spectacle lately. What is this regarding? An awkward pause followed before Martha replied delicately, as if choosing words carefully. Well, this is rather sensitive, but I wanted to provide a heads up. I recently left John Mitchell after discovering overlaps in our relationships. I nearly dropped the phone as her shy confession sank in fully. This total stranger had also been entangled with my lying ex while we were still legally married? I stammered incredulously. Wait, John was dating you while still with me and his little mistress? Unbridled fury clawed up my throat as the room tilted dangerously. That snake truly possessed zero scruples. Martha made sympathetic noises, seemingly misreading my outrage source. I know, it's absolutely shocking discovering his horrid duplicity. I never imagined John deceiving me so callously either, but that courtroom video unlocked the ugly truth. As she prattled on, rehashing betrayal wounds, vindication slowly tempered my boiling vitriol. So yet another blameless woman had fallen prey to John's deceitful charm offensives before recognizing his true colors eventually. At least we could commiserate over hard lessons learned about the false fronts certain master manipulators wear. I gently intercepted Martha's tangent at the next natural pause. Well, I truly appreciate you two taking the initiative to contact me and share your experience. It definitely confirms John's pathological patterns. I chuckled mirthlessly before adding, I mainly feel sorry for whichever poor soul gets ensnared by him next once the charm stocks dwindle. We exchanged a few more pleasantries about moving forward solo as strong, wiser women. After securing Martha's number just in case, I finally hung up, feeling fully reinforced in my life redirect. Lily glanced up from her coloring inquisitively, but I just shook my head, smiling. No need exposing her innocence to John's endless deceptions. She embodied our bright future ahead rather than past darkness.